and guidance on the necessary condition for effective implementation of the Istanbul Protocol by states, notably Chapter 8, pardon. As you all know, torture evokes physical suffering such as beating, electrical shocks, sexual abuse, such as rape and sexual humiliation. Human condition torture also includes human conditional detention, severe overcrowding, and total lack of hygiene, the denial of medical care, and
Roberto?
Yep.
Roberto, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because the interpreters are complaining about the sound. I don't know if you have a better option, or if you can come closer to. I can see you have the microphone hanging there.
Yeah.
Maybe you can.
I can try this way.
Perfect.
Is it better?
I think it is. Thank you.
Okay. So torture. It's important to stress that torture is also a psychological aspect that can inflict equal level of pains, like sleep deprivation, prolonged solitary confinement, or person being threatened that someone that they love will be tortured or killed. The prohibition of torture, is legally called a jus cogens, thus meaning that even if a state is not part of one of several treaties, but specifically ban torture and other ill treatment, it must not resort to it and not tolerate that anyone carry out torture or ill treatment on its territory. From a legal standpoint, act of torture must be investigated, prosecuted, and perpetrators must be punished. The victims have the right to benefit from remedies and reparation, including rehabilitation. Over the last 2 decades, public perception has often equated torture with the fight against terrorism. On the contrary, the reality is that torture can happen to everyone. The victims are most often the poor, marginalized groups, members of ethnic and religious minorities, those without power or any form of social protection. Even children are tortured or otherwise ill-treated, in particularly during the situation of deprivation of liberty, which takes a particular heavy toll on them. Officials, including the police, prey on all these people in secret and without fear of punishment. So torture is also linked to corruption, to the resilience of false confessions, and to authoritarian governments instilling fear to entrench their power. According to the UN Convention Against Torture, the term torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purpose as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act that he or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating, coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind, and such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent of assistance of public official or other person acting in official capacity. It does not include pain or suffering arising only from inherent in or incidental lawful sanction. So the Istanbul Protocol in full is called the UN Manual on the effective investigation or documentation of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. It's an international instrument based on accepted expertise in the field of torture documentation that provides normative standards and clear guidance on the above-mentioned state obligation and how to gather and document physical and psychological evidence of torture that will be used before any court proceeding all of it. The Istanbul Protocol provides guidance on how to prepare and critically assess medical legal reports, which could be used to self-review one's own medical legal reports, peer review the medical legal reports produced by other colleagues, or also to critique a state medical legal reports on alleged acts of torture, which may serve to actually dismiss those claims. What is important to underline is that torture is systematically practiced in half of the countries around the world. And torture is also a global health issue, and it has very particular long-term physical and mental impacts and very profound impacts upon the society. Furthermore, torture necessarily embodies a power imbalance between the victim and the perpetrators. In fact, in case of torture, the perpetrator can be a state actor, and in this sense, they also at the stage of investigation, the state actors are the ones who typically hold all the relevant evidence in this case, and also it is important to see how the difference of power between the victim and the perpetrators at different stages when it comes to torture. So the new edition of the Istanbul Protocol is updated with all the lessons learned from the 20 years of implementation experience, and its aiming in providing critical guidance to states to ensure they fulfill their treaty obligation to investigate, prosecute, and punish torture under the UN Convention Against Torture and international law. The 2022 edition includes new guidance on how to improve impartiality and transparency among monitoring bodies, promotes civil society participation in anti-torture investigations, and clarifies the legal and ethical responsibility of clinicians and lawyers working with particularly vulnerable populations. The key updates, chapter by chapter, and after we will go through them or through all of them, are made. Chapter 1, there are several clarifications of the definition of torture and ill treatment, mainly based on the 20 years of practice and jurisprudence, and updating the relevant mechanism for torture prevention, accountability, and redress. In Chapter 2, there are updates on relevant ethical obligations for legal and health professionals, including guidance on addressing conflicting obligations. Chapter 3 focuses on best practices on legal investigation of torture and ill treatment, including new guidance for judges, prosecutors, and other legal actors. Chapter 4, 5, and 6 updates the practices of the clinical evaluation of physical and psychological evidence, and applying new guidance on evaluation of children and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons. Applying clear and consistent guidance on the interpretation of physical and psychological evidence of torture and ill treatment, and the obligation to provide a conclusion on the possibility of torture. There are, as I said before, there are two new chapters, Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. In Chapter 7, there is additional guidance for clinicians on the documentation of torture and treatment in non-legal context. And in Chapter 8, there is a kind of a roadmap for states in order to implement and undertake a comprehensive sustained action to implement the Istanbul Protocol and its principles in collaboration with international actors and members of civil society. So, regarding Chapter 1, it constitutes a comprehensive legal review of the concept of torture, a synthesis of international jurisprudence on the concept of torture, the interpretation of the main monitoring bodies, and the mechanism of international enforceability. It contains the definition of torture according to the UN Convention. It directs and delegates state responsibility and how this should be understood in the expert process, the criteria of suffering, intentionality, purpose, and application of the sanctions in light of the doctrine of the Committee Against Torture, as well as states' obligation for prevention, including the optional protocol and visiting and monitoring mechanism. The Chapter 1, it also reviews the UN mechanism that have jurisdiction in the field of torture, clarifying a map that it's not always easy for interpretation. There is an updated definition, the adapted definition of torture, as stated in the UN Convention. And there is also a guidance on how to interpret the difference between torture and ill treatment according to the UN Convention, the European Court of
Roberto,
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting you again. I think our interpreters would benefit for perhaps a little bit slower communication, if possible.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Apologies. So in Chapter 1, there is also a paramount change if compared to the previous version, because there is the inclusion of state responsibility. This chapter expands modes by liability under state responsibility and criminal liability. This is include the state's due diligence obligation for acts committed by private actors. Accordingly, a distinction is made between those acting in an official capacity and the concept of tolerance towards acts of non-state actors. Furthermore, it underlines the fact that the prohibition of torture is a non-derogable right, recognized as a jus cogens norm under international law, imposing an obligation erga omnes. But this update underlines that states must ensure that torture is an offense under national criminal law that is punishable by severe penalties, and that acts of torture are not subject to measures designed to eliminate liability. Furthermore, it clarifies the state's obligation to carry out an independent, effective, and prompt investigation based on the updated jurisprudence statements from international institutions and bodies. The update includes also references to victims' rights and needs such as access to justice, redress, and rehabilitation. So states must ensure that victims obtain redress and provide effective rehabilitation according to paragraph 53 of the protocol. States failing to do so can lead victims traumatized and concur in the destruction of families and communities. Redress, states must ensure redress that must include effective remedy on and reparation. Comprehensive reparation must include restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Following this, there is a new addition to Chapter 1 regarding person deprived of liberty who are facing a greater risk of human rights abuse and torture, and those specific sensitive categories who are entitled to certain protection and effective remedies that take into account their individual circumstances. The update elaborates on the right of person deprived of liberty and on the obligation of the state. So the main issues discussed are incommunicado or arbitrary detention, solitary confinement, and living conditions in detention centers. The chapter addressed also a cross-cutting issue regarding children, who, as stated in paragraph 86, exposing minors to poor conditions in detention centers and amount to a violation of their human rights, instilling in them feelings of fear, anguish, and inferiority. Furthermore, there is a focus on the treatment of unaccompanied and separated children outside of their country of origin. Following the decision of the Committee Against Torture, children cannot be returned to a country where there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk of irreparable harm to a child. Throughout the chapter, there are the inclusions of dates of the exclusionary rule based on the recent jurisprudence from international and regional courts. So, the exclusionary rules, as stated by the special rapporteur on torture, is the inadmissibility of evidence obtained through torture methods. Here, another focus on children. It's important to be underlined, as children are more sensible to this kind of collection of information and might face extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearance, corporal punishment, and other cruel or degrading forms of punishment, as well as juvenile justice or deportation. Chapter 2 includes ethical principles affecting judges, prosecutors, and lawyers. And there are two aspects to be underlined for these two specific categories, legal categories. There is a duty from these legal categories to ensure equal treatment to all persons, including minimizing the risk of re-victimization or trauma. Judges have also the duty to promote and protect human rights, not avoiding concealing violation perpetrated by military, paramilitary, or law enforcement agents. These recommendations are mainly in line with international recognized principle of fair trials, and they are willing to push the legal professional to respect these trials. This chapter contains also updates on the role of health professionals, including statements from the World Psychiatric Association and the World Medical Association. These statements establish and expand on the ethical obligation outlined in the Istanbul Protocol from 2004, such as the duty to support colleagues who speak out against human rights, against violation of human rights, the duty not to participate actively or passively in torture or condone it in any way. Furthermore, these updates establish the duty to report and document torture, establish a support reporting mechanism, and furthermore, the chapter clarifies that the ethical obligation applies to all health professionals, governmental and non-governmental, in medical legal context. Chapter 3 explores the legal investigation of torture and ill treatment. It explores how also how the investigation should be conducted, and in this chapter there are the most updates. This the revised version is is doing a thorough job of clarifying and expanding on the minimum condition required for the proper investigation. In international, mostly is it okay with the sound or not?
Roberto, I
Yeah.
think you can continue. We have some comments in the chat that we will be addressing, but you can continue with the presentation. There is a question a little bit about pronunciation in addition to the audio. However, I think keeping it slow is a good idea.
Okay.
And the people who might want a bit of information afterwards can be perhaps send a text or a presentation.
Okay.
So I think that's
Okay,
good. Thank you
thanks.
so much.
So the 2022 version expands on the determination of the appropriate investigative body, while the 2004 version introduced four main issues in this regard, namely establishing a commission of inquiries, guaranteeing procedural safeguards, support of adequate technical and administrative personnel, receive the full scope of state resource and power. The 2022 version add the recognition of principles of investigation, the need to provide training and guidance, the need of preparing investigation, the involvement in the investigation of multiple actors with a varying mandate. And so there is the 2022 version highlights the importance, but also the vulnerability of witnesses, which may cause difficulties and the importance of safeguarding their right. Chapter 4 is addressing the general condition for the interview. The current edition had two new purposes: making the clinical interpretation of the guide findings and give an expert opinion on the possibility of ill treatment or torture, taking into account the psychosocial history, examinations, secondary evidence, and knowledge of regional torture practices. And secondly, to make an assessment of the validity of reliability of its clinical findings. Most of the experts are basing their assessments if they are not included in the AP, but with the new formulation, these expert assessments have become an obligation. The new chapter 4 also provides a detailed analysis of how security conditions and the risk of reprisal should be considered with relevant guidance. The first part the first part of chapter 4 is a practical and detailed translation of the ethical requirements set out in chapter 2. The second part of the chapter deals with strategy for preparation of the interview and building trust in order to find a correct balance to address the allegation and avoiding the risk of re-traumatization, and describe it in more detail than the previous version. It also highlights the need for the clinician to make an analysis of the reasons for these inconsistencies based on the interview and the examination. Finally, the structure of the interview is addressed in detail, following the very same outline of the previous version. On chapter 4, there is a focus on how to collect five pardon, how to collect physical and evidence, and it remains substantially the same. The structure of the examination, the financing, the medical examination of torture, and it is the same for chapter 6, where we are addressing the psychological evidence of torture and ill treatment. The two new chapters are dealing with the role of health professionals in documenting torture and ill treatment, chapter 7, and their state and how they implement and on the implementation of the Istanbul Protocol by states. So chapter 7 aims to clarify the role of health professionals, both in legal and non-legal context, and provide a guidance on the effective investigation and documentation practices in this context. Health professionals working in non-legal context should be familiar with all the relevant Istanbul Protocol chapters, notably chapter 2, 4, 5, 6, and annexes 1 to 4. Chapter 7 also wants to clarify the role of health professionals in monitoring and prevention context in which the primary purpose of clinical is often the prevention of torture and ill treatment rather than evaluating a specific allegation of abuse of the delivery of healthcare. The chapter 7 is forced to be aligned. It's not intended to serve as a comprehensive guidance for critical evaluation of torture and ill treatment. The new chapter 8 is a set of recommendations for the development of public policies and civil society actions for the implementation of Istanbul Protocol in a given country. It could be called a roadmap of aspect to be taken into account by each of the actors involved in the prevention and documentation of torture, and is therefore addressed to a very specific audience. The guidance included in the chapter 8 is based on the core elements of the Istanbul Protocol, as well as the global practical experience of the drafters of the protocol and of the participants. So there are several levels of action that should be taken into account. The guidance is intended, the guidance in chapter 8 is intended to aid the state in implementing the Istanbul Protocol standards and strengthen the conditions necessary for effective legal and medical legal investigation and documentation of torture and ill treatment. This guidance is also intended to serve as a framework for accountability for state implementation of effective investigation and documentation practices. There are several points to be taken into account. The first one is the political will of the state in all a political will at national level to all the government agency and to ensure the full commitment and action to apply a policy of zero tolerance against torture and to address or to push for a national plan on action of the ban of torture. A second important point is that there must be an effective and functional criminal justice system. The existence of criminal procedure rules and rules of evidence that must respect the rights of detained and accused person. Further, there is a need for good governance, so accountability and transparency from the state and state authorities. There is a need for cooperation between national, regional, international institutions, including UN and multilateral organizations, and non-governmental organizations. Lastly, an active civil society participation to the whole process that states should then facilitate the interaction with civil society actors and NGO movement, professional organizations, and leaders on anti-torture actions. And states should also encourage and support a national network of non-governmental clinicians working on documenting torture. this is more, this chapter, as you have seen, is more about recommendation on how to implement the Istanbul Protocol at national level, and it endorses a roadmap to see how civil society can, independent civil society can cooperate with state authorities to denounce the crime of torture, and to document it, and to push for a reform at the internal national level of states according to national, regional, and international standards. So,
thank you so much, Roberto.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for this overview of the new Istanbul Protocol and for highlighting this special vulnerability that children experience regarding the harrowing long-term effect of torture, as well as the state's responsibilities. We have had some issues with audio, which have been discussed in the chat. We acknowledge this. We will continue to work on this together to increase the webinar experience to all. Thank you so much. And now we will give the floor to Hugh MacLeod. He also works with us at the IRCT. Some of you might know him as the communications lead, but he's also a barrister and a human rights specialist. So Hugh, I will give the floor to you now.
Thanks, Carmen. What an intro. And thanks, Roberto. That was a very comprehensive look at all the different chapters of this mighty tome. So, okay, well, brief introduction and why it's relevant to myself and the IRCT to be doing torture. Sorry, we're getting more feedback in the office. Myself and my role at the IRCT. I mean, I was a journalist for a decade in the Middle East, and without really seeking it out, I came across quite a lot of people who had been tortured, including children, and filmed some of them. And I'm going to show you a couple of those things in a moment. And thinking about the Istanbul Protocol and what I was doing there as a journalist, I can see the importance of, actually coming to the subject with a legal and medical approach, as well as the role of the journalist to simply get the story. And I think it's quite interesting to look at some videos of children living in conditions of war and have been directly tortured. And we can then see what the Istanbul Protocol might tell us about how we could investigate their situation better. But before we start, pop quiz, because I imagine that the number of people who've actually read this thing is very, very, very low. Okay, we've got 88 participants. Who's going to confess to having not read it? Come on, pop quiz. Look at my copy, it's got sellotape on. That's because I actually thought we'd better read this thing when it came out. So have you ever read the original Istanbul Protocol, or have you read the 2022 version? While you take the quiz, I will guide you to some resources that you might want to use to understand this whole thing. I'm very aware that we're talking to you for a second time, in that we've done the basics. And now we're doing the updated version. So as a kickoff, you can visit IRCT's wonderful new website, which is basically my third child. It's a personal endeavor, a labor of great love, etc., etc. If you go to irct.org, resources, Istanbul Protocol, here we go. I'll put it in the chat. Please find there a hopefully fairly useful explanation as to what it's all about and what's new. Please get the Here we go. Yes, 10%, no, 61%. Only the relevant parts. Yeah, very good. Because there's a lot of repetition in it. Do you have a copy of it in front of you? Okay, brilliant. Well, 47% is much more than I thought, but for that 53%, while I'm talking, could you please go to irct.org and download the Istanbul Protocol? Because we're going to go through a bit of it. Let's get into the weeds, as Lisa likes to say. Okay, that's a little intro. So what does war, trauma, and children, what does the Istanbul Protocol, the updated Istanbul Protocol tell us? Well, I can make life very easy for everybody and say nothing. Nothing directly. So that's the end of my presentation. Nope. It doesn't actually say anything directly. Let's have a look at the introduction, the contents page. Okay, just bear with me a sec when I start sharing. Here we go. Share sound. Optimize video clip. Istanbul Protocol. Let's have a look. Ding, 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 ding. Here it is. We're all it's working. Okay. Look at that content. Ooh. Relevant legal norms. Ethical codes. Great. Judges, prosecutors, lawyers. Legal investigation of torture and ill treatment. Is that different from medical investigation? That's confusing. General considerations for interviews. That's actually very interesting as a former journalist. Physical evidence of torture. Psychological evidence of torture. I think we all understand the difference between those things and the importance of psychological evidence, which is in the overwhelming number of cases, the main source of evidence you have. Role of health professionals. That's mostly you guys. I myself, as was said, I'm, a barrister. I qualified for the English bar. By that time I had 2 Danish children, so I decided rather good place to live in Copenhagen. So I'm a lawyer, as is Roberto and others on our advocacy team. But how do lawyers and doctors work together? That's really crucial to the Istanbul Protocol and the entire purposes of the IRCT. And then implementation of the protocol, that's for states. But if you look at this, I don't see any kind of little sub-paragraph or chapter that deals with war. So we had better establish why on earth we're talking about war, trauma, and children and torture. So let me just start with a little bit of journalism. Hang on, now I can do this. Show my whole desktop. So apologies for the mess, which is always my desktop. Okay, what does war and torture have to do with each other? Well, obviously, and unfortunately, war almost always brings torture, certainly to adults and often to children. And the Syrian uprising, when I was back in the day, Al Jazeera, here's me, that's, gosh, more than 10 years ago. It was here on March 16th that the spark was lit for the Syrian uprising. The Shab Yurid Eskat the Nizam. People want to topple the regime. These young boys graffitied on a wall, and then they were taken to the cells of General Atif Najib, the cousin of President Bashar al-Assad. There they were beaten, bloody, burned, and had their fingernails pulled out by grown men working for a regime whose unchecked brutality appears increasingly to be sowing the seeds of its undoing. That was optimistic on my part in terms of undoing. I actually truly believed if you document enough torture, killing, rape, all the rest of it, a regime like the Assad regime will not be able to continue in the 21st century. Wrong about that, but it doesn't mean we don't do it. And through the uprising, there were very, very powerful and disturbing cases of children gratuitously tortured. This is a story I broke, Hamza Khatib. Again, this was a moment where I thought that journalism could change the world, because after this story broke, the next day Hillary Clinton spoke about it, and it looked like, wow, this is a way to really bring down, help establish human rights, bring down tyranny. I'll leave you to read that story if you want to later. But effectively, you know, this is gratuitous, targeted torture of a child for no purpose. He's simply a Sunni Muslim and the Assad regime, Alawites. So let's see what torture in children could be, and have a little break from all of us speaking. I hope this plays correctly on the computer.
قاعد يقول لي بدكن حرية، بدكن إسقاط نظام ويضرب بزيادة. سألوا لي شو اسمك وشو اسم أبوك ومنين أنت وليش طلعت مظاهرات، وقال لي أنت شوف، قال لي رجعني هيك فيديو، قال لي ما هذا أنت، قلت له لا ما أنا، صار يضربني، قال لي ما هذا أنت، قلت له لا ما أنا، ضربني، آخر شيء قلت له إيه أنا، وصار يضربوني بزيادة. كنا عم نطلب كلمة حرية لأنه عندنا ببلادنا كل شيء مضطهد، يعني حقوق، ما في حقوق إنسان، ما في شيء، يعني كله مضطهد. يعني الزنزانات مليانة، بس يعني معنا ولا شيء بيعبر عن الحرية. حرية مثلا التعبير عن الرأي، المناهج ما تكون كل، مثلا أنا مثلا عم بدرس ما تكون كلها متعلقة بحافظ وبالشعر، يعني تكون ممنهجة على كل شيء يعني بيحتوي، بس للأسف عندنا بسوريا ما في شيء من هذا. قلت لهم ساعتني صغير، ليه عم تضربوني هيك؟ قالوا لي صغير، قالوا لي ليه كنت عم تطلع مظاهرات ما زالك صغير؟ قلت لهم مشان أعبر عن رأيي يجوا يضربوني زي. وقت كنا بالزنزانة وقت استدعوني أنا مشان يضربوني، ضربوني بإجري وبصدري. غميت على الوعي حوالي شي 10 دقائق، من ربع ساعة. حسيت انه روحي رجعت لي، يعني بعد ما كنت متعذب ويعني وغميان على الوعي لفترة، يعني حسيت روحي رجعت لي بعد، يعني حمدت الله وشكرته انه ما متت. جابوا كماشة ومفك، صاروا يمسكوه هيك من أبعد، دق بالكماشة بالمفك، إجا صار يخلخل مسكه بالبانسة وأبع بالكماشة. صرت أبكي لأنه وجع كثير كان أول. أنا وبدي نام، أنا ونايم بشوف حالي بالمنام كيف كنت عم بتعذب يعني. وكل ما كنت مثلا قاعد لحالي بتذكر وبصير أبكي على حالي يعني.
Okay, so that's one case of obviously direct torture of a child. As we play videos, I'd invite you to, because I know we're talking to a lot of health professionals, to think about how you would diagnose the children we're seeing in these films. I'm not a medical expert. I was just collecting these testimonies because it seemed important. Obviously, you know, Ahmed was 13 back then in 2011. Let's say he came to Finland with his parents eventually. He could end up in your center with no physical symptoms. But obviously, there would be psychological damage, profound psychological damage. And I think Berta has a tool we can use for people to put out the kinds of diagnostic symptoms that they would expect to find in these kids, just to get you thinking about what we find in torture in children. Okay, so children get tortured in war. What about the impact of war generally on children? Can we consider war as a kind of torture. Of course, this is not in any legal sense. It's never been established in that way. But the symptoms of the trauma that come from living through a war are very, very similar to the trauma that comes from having been tortured. So when we watch this short clip, this is a very sort of different situation, but perhaps we can also think about the kinds of symptoms of the trauma that we can find in these children. Just bear with me.
I did share the Padlet link on the chat. So if you can just click on that link and add here, double click here and add your Padlet. This is like a post-it, basically.
صار الضرب يعني حسينا انه الضرب صار يجي علينا صارت يقولوا هون بين بعض انه صار بدها الشغله انه ننزل الملاجئ بس مشان الاولاد والاطفال.
نحن هلا بدنا ننزل على الملاجئ بس يعني الصوت بخف تحت شوي بصير الواحد بفكره انه بعيد يعني كمان نفسي يعني هيك بحس شوي بالامان يعني. بس وقت بصير الضرب علينا كثير لا ملجأ ولا شيء يحمينا الله الحال.
نحن جنب المزرعة اللي كانت هجموا عليهم يقولوا لهم يطلعوا ما يطلعوا فاتوا عليهم بالسكاكين صاروا يتبعوا العالم. وكان في واحد اسمه أنس تخبى على السقيفة. في واحد تخبى على السقيفة نفض الله نفده عشان يثبت إنه عيلته استشهدت.
طب بس كيف عرفت إنه هيك صار عندهم؟
لأنه شوفنا عيلنا وإجوا لعنا تخبوا وكل شيء. وبعد ما ونحن نيمنا بالإعلام عنا عالم وفي عالم نامت عنا 3 ليالي وبين الزمن اجى واحد عنا انوس هاد العوش خسناه ضل ساعة يعمل هيك شي 4 ساعات هيك يعمل. نحن يشغل كل ما شفت اسلحه صرت بتمنى شيله يعني هلا اخي وهو نايم بيعمل دم وهو نايم. كثر ما سمع هون صار يعمل اخت صوت وتعا يا ياسين
هو نايم؟
يحكي مثل كأنه فايق.
من وين جابها؟ شو حلوة، تعي وريني كيف تلعبي فيها؟ كيف تلعبي فيها؟ كنتوا سوا بالبيت؟ وقت توفت ماما كنتي معها بالبيت؟
رحت جابت خبز وسويها بالقناص.
زرتيها لماما شي بعد ما دفنوها ولا ما قدرتي؟
زرتي ماما شي بعد ما ماتت؟
لا ما زرتيها؟
وين قبرها ممنوعة لسه؟
تعرف حاجة كيف نروح مهما شتت الدنيا عني تذكري نشلح شحاحتنا نشلح دركا مسابقة على الشتي وتلج التلج.
شو هي اللي بإيدك؟
هاي مصطاد كتير بالشوارع تلاقيها كتير.
انت شفت شي حدا متصاوب شي مرة؟
شفت كتير.
كيف كانوا متصاوبين؟
ايديهم اجريهم راسهم في ناس ما تلاقي لها لا راس لا ايدين لا اجرين. في منهم 3 أشهر مرة لهم بالبريد حطوهم بالبراد ما مش حل دفنوهم لهم شي 3 أشهر ريحتهم طالعة.
رفقاتك بالمدرسة وينهم هلا؟
حتى ما يتوفوا.
رفقاتك بالمدرسة؟
في من حوالي بالحارة، يعني ألعب معهم شوي بالحارة.
شفت الجيش شي مرة أنت؟ يعني وقت شفتهم شو كانوا عم يعملوا؟ كيف بفتشوا؟
فوتوا على البيوت وبفتشوا إذا في سلاح.
فاتوا لعندكم على البيت؟
اجى واحد عيط لي شو اسمك؟ قلت له احمد. قال لي اي صف؟ قلت له الثالث. قال لي ردد قال لي الشعب يريد. قلت له الشعب. قال لي شو؟ قال لي شو بعدها؟ قلت له بشار الاسد.
Okay. So yeah, played that for you because I mean I know you all have much more expertise than I would at the insights into kind of the symptoms that would come from a child like that, but just because it actually fitted very closely to what I would like to just play you now, very brief film from one of our resident experts, Pau Perez-Salas, about how war and torture may be interrelated. Let me just get that. Okay. Wait. Bear with me a moment. And I mean, what's just looking at those videos, I mean, just from a sort of non-expert perspective, I mean, we've got kids dreaming about dying. We've got them relating a story of one of their friends in a shower, trembling so much he could barely speak. Nightmares, waking up, saying, you know, I've been shot. And then you can hear the susceptibility to children of the adult environment, you know, references to God and heaven and bearing witness to who killed me. I'm sure there's lots more going on as well. But it starts to bring up some of the themes that we need to think about when documenting trauma, torture in children, and what the IP itself covers. So let's just have a quick listen in to Pau. It's only 2 minutes, and he will establish, I hope, how are the impacts of war and torture related? Okay.
Well, war is what we call a global institution. A global institution means that all the society changes, and the rules that usually operate in society don't work anymore, and then there is no middle position. It's black and white. You are with us or against us. Also, it means, as part of this black and white thought, that you identify your own group as the group that has all positive values, and the other are the ones who obviously are the evil ones, are the negative ones, and this means dehumanizing the others. And so it's like that the history is built also to serve the purposes of torture, and you try to find a moral background for killings, a moral background for torture, a moral background. You have no other possibility but doing what you are doing. War means that justice is perverted, that the normal concept of justice is lost, and you realize that there are human beings that can perpetrate atrocities against you or your relatives, or simply because you were born in a certain place, simply because you have a certain gender or a certain age or whatever other reasons. It breaks the way that you understand how are human beings, and so I think that the consequences are pretty similar in many senses as torture.
Okay. So hopefully we've established that there are some important links between war and torture, not just that war brings torture, but war can result in impacts that are very similar to torture. Let's move to the IP, because that's what we're here to mainly talk about. So can everybody get their copy? It's hard to see. I used to teach online law classes, and you could put people into breakout rooms and then bomb them by turning the camera on, but I don't know how to do that. I'll just trust you. I'm sure you've all got your IP up and running.
Before you continue, it's just that the Finnish interpreters, they are interpreting at the same time. So just choose one of them. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Back to share screen. Okay. So, what does the IP tell us about children and torture? Okay. It starts on page 133. It's actually not a hugely extensive section. Let's go to it. Sorry. Learn. Here we go. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip around using this thing. 566, paragraph 566. Here we go. Children and torture. Okay. So let's deal first with like the limitations of the IP, because there are substantial limitations, particularly for you guys as health specialists, many specialists dealing with children, particularly. This is not a complete discussion of the psychological impact of torture on children, or even a complete guideline for conducting an evaluation of a child that's been tortured. The Torture Journal, which is an offshoot of the IRCT, and I'm sure some of you are avid readers of it, was actually calling for a comprehensive set of guidelines. And I think those are still to be established. So that's an area of study which might be interesting to some people in the webinar. But the basic first point is, it's not comprehensive, but it is useful. Let's go through just what it tells clinicians, and I'll do it quite quickly because I'm sure you already know. It goes through the importance of age, developmental considerations. These are paragraphs 569 to 575. And we saw this, I think, in the video a little bit. That's another reason why I wanted to play it. We could see the way different age children expressed themselves, recalled what had happened. They all have different capacities. So for the non-experts, you can turn to these paragraphs, 569 through to 575. It tells you between age 6 and 12, children can do this. Adolescents are less concrete in their thinking. They are capable of symbolic, rational thinking, etc., etc. 575, a child's reactions to torture depends on age, developmental stage, cognitive skills. These are things that are all important, but probably not uniquely insightful. What are the unique challenges working with children? Here we've got 5 paragraphs, 567 and 582. I think a very important thing up here, children often do not express their thoughts and emotions regarding trauma verbally, but rather behaviorally. And that's obviously going to have a huge impact on how we document, investigate torture using the Istanbul Protocol if we want to establish evidence worthy of an accountability mechanism, the legal aspects, the medico-legal part. And it's something, obviously, as a journalist, I wasn't doing. We were just filming kids talking. We weren't observing their behavior. as a way to understand the evidence of their torture. But that's something people on this webinar, I think, will be doing. And so the IP has a little bit about that. 582, we have symptoms appearing in children. They rely much more heavily on observations of the child's behavior. Yeah. So you can all read that at your own leisure, but I'm just sort of taking you through it. Considerations before interviewing a child, go back to 576. Obviously, the better prepared you are, the better the interview, the assessments, the clinical evaluation, whatever you want to call it, will go. So, gathering information from parents, teachers, and others about the child's developmental history, all of that, you can read that as well. You've got to be very aware about bringing parents into the assessment. Much of the time, it's going to be very important to have them there. Some of the time, the parents will be perpetrators of the torture or be related to the perpetrators. And obviously, in that situation, you're not going to get anything useful out of the child. So you've got to be very, very aware of that. And then there's some considerations of, establishing rapport. What do you actually talk about? Well, 579, neutral things to start with. School, everyday life, friendships, toys, that kind of thing. And I think our journalist there in Syria, it wasn't myself, it was a local journalist who had been training. I think she did a very good job of that, actually, talking to kids using kid-like language. So let's have a look again at an expert narrative and I. That's POW on the impacts. How do children experience trauma? And what are the symptoms?
There is an
for a reason.
Can't see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're all in the same office, Hugh, Berta, and I, so we're working through the different microphones and different screens.
Most people share is that children are more resilient than we usually think. It will depend on the way that the family as a group copes with situations, and they see war from the perspective of their parents. So the understanding they have is the understanding that their parents have. What happens is that children normalize violence, children normalize whatever. This can lead to the idea that they are resilient to everything, and that's not true. Normalizing horror means that there is a kind of dissociation between what your brain tells you, that there is a dead person, and what you see around, that nobody cares about that it seems that other children also don't react to that, and what is expected from you is not to react to that. But this is, of course, stored in your memory, and this appears as symptoms. They will express those symptoms that sometimes are very subtle.
We are where the video froze, so we're working through these technical difficulties, and either the video or Hugh will be back with us very soon.
Okay. Anyway, I'll be sending all these links. You can watch POW again at your leisure. I've only got 5 minutes left, so what I want to get to is...
Hugh, sorry, you actually have 2 minutes left, or 1 now, so if you can kindly wrap up.
Okay. Okay. We've got to understand the obligation of health professionals to document torture. Let's just go to one key paragraph, 604. Chapter 7 deals with that, so you can read chapter 7 at your leisure again. And there are legal and non-legal contexts. But I would suggest that the key paragraph is 604, because all of these international associations have established an ethical obligation for a universal duty for health professionals to document and report torture and ill treatment. Obviously, there's different settings, custodial, non-custodial. There'll be settings where it's simply a medical clinic. Obviously, you're going to face ethical obligations where the individual does not want to report, and that there may be a risk in reporting torture. However, where an individual alleges torture and provides informed consent, health professionals are required to give a clinical evaluation and document and report torture and ill treatment and substantiate the allegation. And just let me take you to the final part. I just want to say, what does substantiate the allegation mean? Okay, the level of consistency. This is something I think can be very useful. Here we go, 380. This is the level of consistency between the overall evidence of torture and the allegation. And health professionals should be using these, not consistently. The findings could not have been caused by the alleged torture, all the way through to diagnostic of. The finding could not have been caused in any other way other than that described. Those are kind of important legal terms that will then carry weight in a accountability mechanism, such as a trial, because you're giving an expert opinion. And I think the main message from the IRCT 2022 is health professionals are frontline human rights defenders and experts, and they should, unless there's compelling reasons not to be doing it, they should be documenting torture and giving this assessment of the likelihood that the allegation meets the evidence. Okay, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Maybe you can mute your microphone. Thank you so much. Yes, so in the interest of time, I won't comment anything myself because we have now the 10 minutes for the Q&A. I remind you that we have 2 Q&A sessions today. So this first Q&A is in relation to the presentations of Hugh and Roberto. I have been checking the chat and I think we don't have any questions in the chat. So now it is the time to pop your questions in the chat, or you can also put your hand up and you can use your microphone. Thank you. In the meantime, Berta, could we please check the outcome of the padlock to see perhaps some of the ideas that people thought after watching this video?
There you go. And actually, I mean, maybe Hugh, if there are no questions, maybe you can comment on what we can see on screen.
I'm happy to go over them myself. A lot of them are actually clinical terms or related to clinical terms. So if we have any clinicians with us today, it would be great to hear what you think about some of these words. So we have somatic symptoms, we have cortisol, stress, anxiety, PTSD, confusion, nightmares, irritability, anger, pain, and normalizing atrocity, loss of vitality in the mimic and gesture, and decreased cognitive abilities, sense of helplessness, and also felt by the witness and watchers. So by looking at this, is there any other ideas that come to your mind? Can you relate to these concepts? Have you thought the same? Or is there any particular concept that you have expertise on and you would like to share with us? For instance, I think, do we have a hand up? Oh, I could hear some microphone. Hello?
Yes, come in.
Hello.
I'm trying to raise my hand. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Stella from Tree of Life, Zimbabwe. So yeah, just to say this is very true in terms of some of the symptoms that we can see from young people, especially if they're suffering from trauma. Another one that I also wanted to add was delayed developmental stages. Yeah, in terms of developmental stages that can be delayed as a sign of trauma, in addition to the decreased cognitive abilities. So you do see that quite a lot, where young people sometimes are bedwetting, abnormal eating behaviors and stuff like that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. For those who might not know, Stella is also one of our panelists for later on, who we will introduce later on. But Stella is speaking as an expert in child protection. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, Stella. Is there any other person, especially with health backgrounds, but also if you have any other kind of background that wants to comment on this? And it doesn't have to be in the padlock. It could be questions to Hugh or Roberto or on the subject matter that takes us here today. I cannot see any other questions. Oh, there is someone speaking in the chat, Sarah Edin Tetzlaff from PSZ Düsseldorf, who is also one of our member centers. And Sarah is saying avoidance. When the girl is asked to talk about her mother's death and starts to talk about positive memories. Thank you so much, Sarah. That's interesting, because I think it could perhaps be read in different ways. And I guess part of it is depending on when the person is speaking about these positive experiences, whether it comes at the end of a long process of working with the trauma and receiving support, or if it's a response because the person just doesn't want to go there, as you seem to perhaps be suggesting. And we have another comment from Chandresa Propastika, who I know, and she works at KRCT, one of the RCT member centers in Kosovo. And Chandresa is a psychologist, and she's saying, hello all. I would add, in case there is sexual trauma involved, there would be by an intrusive symptom of repetitive sexual play, reenactment of trauma. I think I understand what you want to say, Chandresa, but it perhaps is not as clear to everyone else. So would you like to say a couple of words on your comment? I don't know if you're able to speak. If not, I will go on to following messages. So we have EA Suzanne Akasha, who is also who is actually our next speaker after the Q&A and the break. And Suzanne is saying, not a symptom, but a reaction. Anger in case of the tortured boy. Yep, and I think that's probably one of the reactions that the wider audience might find easy to understand. Anger is mostly an emotion that is easy for others to see when it's displayed in an obvious manner. And then we have Maria Eugenia Buceta. I think I'll be translating from Spanish, so please bear with me if I don't do that as well as our interpreters. So Maria Eugenia is saying, post-traumatic stress is a continuous presence, so maybe a continuous reality. What happened a long time ago that happened a long time ago. People continue to experience like something that happened just a few moments ago. Especially people can remember very concrete and small details like smells, colors, and so on. So thank you so much, Maria Eugenia. And I can see it's 2:25. Oh, yeah, I can see there's someone else wanting to speak. Is there anyone else that was using the microphone?
Hi.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. The audio is not excellent, but if you want to try.
Okay, how about now?
If you want to try, go ahead. A little bit better. We will see whether it's sufficient. If you want to try, please go ahead.
Okay, just wanted to say that when a child is PSC, sometimes they... Is it okay if I say it in Spanish?
I'm sorry. Yes, you can say it in Spanish, but I have to add that the audio is not very good. So if you have the chance to use the chat, that would actually be excellent. Could you use the chat?
Okay.
Thank you. So we will wait for your comment on the chat. And in the meantime, we have another comment from Chandresa, psychologist at IRCT Kosovo, who says that her microphone is not working very well. And she adds an explanation of what she meant. If there is a case of sexually abused child or witness of such abuse, one of the observed symptoms involved in PTSD, in this case, would be that the child would conduct repetitive sexual play, which is imitating the trauma with toys, for example. Thank you, Chandresa. That's much more clear now. And we have a comment from Andres that is asking about children who are witness of torture. Andres, I don't know if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on your question, and perhaps Hugh or Roberto or any person with us that is a clinician could answer. But if we don't have any other questions to keep with the program, it's actually the time for a break, which I think will be welcome by everyone because it's an interesting but long event. So we're going to have 10 minutes break until 2:35. I remind you that we have another Q&A session at the end of the session, so we will be able to pick up on these other comments that you're adding to the chat. And now feel free to go for a refreshment, tea, or anything that you see fit. See you soon. Thank you so much.
Back in 10.
Hello, everyone. We hope that you're back in front of the screen with your Istanbul Protocol, your tea, your refreshments, and that you're ready for the next session. I'll give a few more seconds, not even minutes, for everyone to come back. And I've seen a couple of more comments on the chat that can be discussed in the next Q&A. So thank you so much to Violet Tamu and to Elizabeth from Fundación Priva for their comments, which we will address later on. And now I'm very glad to introduce you to EA Suzanne Akasha, who will be joining us from, my colleague Berta, who is on the technical front. She's telling me that I actually said the wrong thing. So before having EA Suzanne, we have Timea Torsa, who is joining us from Hungary. She works at the Cordelia Foundation and she's a clinical child psychologist. Timea, we're very happy to have you here. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. I will share my screen for the presentation. So as you said, I'm from Hungary. I'm from the Cordelia Foundation. I'm a clinical.
Sorry, can I ask you to share like full screen? You can see it's on the icon here, right next to the zoom in and zoom out option on the right bottom.
I didn't share my full screen.
No, we're still seeing the PowerPoint, but not full screen.
Sorry.
You can try to reshare.
And now
it's still the same.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe you need to stop sharing and reshare. Okay. Yeah.
So full screen, the first one. Right now?
Now, perfect. Thank you, Timea.
Thank you for reminding me. So my topic will be a little bit different than the presentations before. I will be speaking about our experiences with the Ukraine crisis and especially the children and the war trauma. So as many of you know, the Cordelia Foundation is working in Hungary with refugees since 1996, providing mental health care to refugees. But this is the first time that there are so many children and mothers. So there are more children psychologists now working than ever before. We work all across the country. Most of us work with interpreters, but we have Russian-speaking child psychologists also. And we travel the shelters across the country. We mainly visit two groups of clients, and I will be focusing on the first client group, the one from the war zone, so from eastern and the southern parts of Ukraine. But there are also groups from the western part of Ukraine, the closer to our border, the Zakarpatska, so these are mothers, these are Hungarian-speaking people who have social disadvantages and adjustment difficulty, but with no explicit war trauma. We provide different types of psychological help as child psychologists. So there are many clients who are basically just passing through Hungary and going to other countries, and maybe they don't stay for a long time at the shelters, and they still have an opportunity to speak with us and have a question or ask a problem. For example, there are teenagers who are traveling without their parents and going abroad, and in these cases we can also have a crisis intervention in just one session, but usually it's a repeated meeting. So as you can guess, it's usually the parent who is asking for help and not the child or the teenager. And in a variety of topics, the parents can ask for help, since sometimes their problem or question is not connected to the war. Maybe it's some situation that was going on before, but they didn't have a chance to visit a psychologist in Ukraine, so they can also ask for help concerning that. And many times we work with groups. We organize different types of groups for children. Sometimes these are spontaneous groups with different children living in the same shelter, but sometimes these are already existing groups. So there are, for example, different sports teams from their associations staying in Hungary without parents, just with their coaches and trainers. And we also organize different groups for them to help them connect to each other in a different way than just through their sport. Like I said, we usually visit the shelters, but there's also an opportunity to come to our center, to the office, and have repeated sessions weekly, or also a more complex psychological assessment. This type of working with refugees is very different than the usual setting for a child psychologist, since we're working not in our mother language, not in our mother tongue, but with an interpreter. I'm sorry, you are seeing this. We work in teams with the interpreters, and with the therapists who travel together, usually in the car or on the train, to go to the shelters. And this can provide a different type of dynamic. Of course, there's a language barrier since we are working with another language, but the nonverbal parts can become more significant and provide a different type of speciality to the therapy, using more gestures or using more body language, or our facial expressions become more important. This situation that there's a third person in the therapeutic dyad has its disadvantages and advantages. Of course, with the child being the client, it's a little bit different than with an adult, since not all children understand yet, due to their developmental age, that the interpreter is the voice of the therapist, and for sometimes the child, the therapist, and the interpreter is also a very important person. So there can be situations when the therapist becomes an observer and is not in an active role, but it can also be used as a tool that the therapist is able to observe how the child is interacting with the interpreter, and this can also be used to gather information. This situation creates a lot more distance in the therapy, but the fact that we are going into their private space and visiting their room in the shelters and sitting on their beds, this can also create a feeling of intimacy and closeness. So today there was also already mention of the symptoms that can appear in war trauma, and here I listed the most common symptoms that we usually encounter that are the most frequent. Many times, for example, in the beginning, especially when in March and in April, the refugees began to stay in different shelters in different cities. We got many requests from the owners of the shelter that there's a problem with the children, that they are too active, they don't know how to behave in this type of environment. And of course, it was a stressful situation because most of these children were living in an average family home and they didn't know how to behave in this kind of not so friendly environment with just less private spaces. By the way, most of these shelters have some kind of playrooms, but of course it's not the same situation as at home. It was general that there are problems with cooperation with other children and general behavior problems because they are together day and night. So now the school year started, so it's another phase of this whole experience, but for many months they were basically just staying at the shelter for all the days, and this caused a lot of frustration in the communities. I think it's not surprising that one of the most frequent symptoms are the anxiety and often the separational anxiety. So being anxious about the future, about the past, about the unknown, and of course about losing the parent or losing relatives and all the different losses. Today, it was already also mentioned that the changes in developmental milestones or regressions is a typical symptom, and it can occur in many different areas of the child's development. So, for example, the loss of speech or the attention capacity becomes worse, and so on and so on. The disturbances in emotional reactions and mood and irritability is also very typical. And also the sleep disorders that maybe they are not able to express so much, but they can express that they are having more vivid dreams than at home, and they suddenly start remembering all of their dreams. And also the somatic symptoms were mentioned today already, that some children just aren't able to express their emotions in any other way, but they just have a stomach ache or a headache, or they are always tired. And also the increased startle response is typical, mostly in smaller children who have a less mature nervous system, and they really are able to have a step back in this. For example, I can recall a small boy who was 6 years old, and they had a really traumatic escape from home, and he became so sensitive to every little change in the environment that, for example, even when he by accident broke a tree branch, he started to cry because he felt so sorry for the tree. Some of the main stressors are maybe general. So for many of you, it's not surprising who work with refugees for many years, but I listed some of the most typical ones that we can see right now. And we see that the stressors are in many different time zones, and they are all present at the same time. So the child not only experienced many threats and losses in the past, but the situation of the present is also really stressful. So from the war zone, many of the families that escaped had to go through really severe experiences with seeing shooting in like a usual everyday way. By the way, many families state that for them this is not something new, because in 2014 they had the same experience, but at the same time many families have really close experiences of bombings, that the neighboring houses are bombed or missiles fly into their house. And this side of destruction is really lasting. So it's not something that goes away maybe in a few days or a few months just because they left the scene. And also it's very common that the parents, even though they themselves didn't have any severe injuries, they got involved in helping in helping strangers who were injured, and the child really has a vivid memory of this and is recalling this situation. During the migration, it's the migration journey, leaving the father behind, leaving older siblings behind, or the grandparents behind. It's something that is really catastrophic for a child who before lived in a really whole family. So for them, this is not something that was able to be foreseen, and this is a real big trauma for them, that suddenly they are just alone with their mother in most cases, and with their some of their siblings. And also many of them have really bad memories of the journey. So from the train rides, what they experienced, and for example, crossing the border can also be a really shocking and really intimidating experience for younger children. Right now in the present situation, it's also not so easy for the refugee children and their families, for their mothers, because they are really experiencing a lot of isolation compared to their past life. So they live in shelters with other families who they either get along with or maybe not, and the parent is suddenly alone with the whole experience of parenthood, and there can be a lot of challenging experiences at the accommodations also. So it's not something so comfortable for someone who was living in a big house before to live in a 2-bedroom small room. And of course, the fact that the limited social networks really causes them to feel a sense of loneliness, that they lost not only their family, but also the children loses their the classmates, the friends. And this is really a different type of life that they had in the past. And for the child, this can be a really, really big factor, that the parent is also feeling loss and feeling uncertainty. So today this was already a topic. I also want to mention this, that this differential diagnosis is always a question, because as you see, the stress isn't just in the past, it's also in the present. So they have the stress of the father being away, and they have the stresses of the current environment. And on the other hand, many times the symptoms of the child can be viewed as something natural, something not so pathological, but as grief, in my opinion, that they are actually grieving their past life, their past belongings, and their past memories. There have been studies before how the role of the parents are really crucial, that the refugees who resettle as parents must face the impacts of their trauma, while at the same time they have to raise and support the child. And it's been shown that trauma impacts the parenting scale. So the parent can suddenly act differently towards the child, and it can be in a negative way. So it can have a negative effect on the psychological well-being of the child. For example, the harsh parenting. A parent who is traumatized can maybe find not too healthy ways to deal with their pain, and they, for example, might turn to more alcohol and to deal with the child in a way that wasn't usual before. So this is a really important topic, that the trauma of the child is really connected to the parent's trauma. And also there have been studies that show that, for example, the demandingness of a parent, if they have a more authoritative parenting style, can actually be a factor that provides resilience or protection, because it can be a holding space for the child that can be helpful in the chaos, in the chaotic times, if they in an empathetic way, but show some kind of high responsiveness in this way, that they are demanding and really try to keep some system in their life that they had before. So it's always a question how the traumatized parent can maintain parenthood. How can they regulate the child's emotions if they themselves aren't able to deal with their own losses? And this would be a topic that would need more interventions, or it should be discussed with the families more, how their parenting style is really something that can help the child be better. And of course, the trauma is always present. So these trauma and loss reminders are always present. For example, by the father's not being present. It's something that is really causing distress, not only to the child, but to the mother. And the way how they deal with this, how they are able to react to this, this internal reminder of the trauma is supposed to really be in connection with how they are able to fight with the symptoms or with the traumatic experience. In the bottom line, I put a question down that is supposed to be a quiz question, because this is a really reoccurring topic that many of the Ukrainian parents refuse to talk about the war with their children. When the child brings up memories, they advise them to try to forget everything, or not think about it, not talk about it. They always tell them that we came away from Ukraine to try to forget it, so we don't need to remember it. And this would be a question, what you think, if this is an adaptive or a maladaptive coping strategy. So maybe in the chat, you can put 1 if you think it's adaptive and 2 if it's maladaptive, but maybe it's too easy question.
Thank you, Timea. I encourage everyone to share their thoughts in the chat. And may I add, it is interesting because you're mentioning whether it is adaptive or maladaptive, but it will have one impact on the parent and a different impact on the child. So the same strategy can be, can have different outcomes for different people. So that's very interesting. We have a hand up by Mike Nkube. So Timea, would you like to take answers through the microphone, or should we encourage people to speak on the chat and then add the comments in the Q&A?
I see I don't have so much time left. There's one more slide with a case I wanted to share, but if you think we can discuss this, then we can listen to the comment.
Thank you. I will respect your presentation time. So Mike, please, I will ask you to leave the comment on the chat, and we can elaborate on it if you would like to in the Q&A. And Timea, please, you can continue.
Okay, so it's just one more slide that I wanted to share a bit about a way that is somehow connected to the slide I mentioned before about this trauma of the parent and the trauma of the child. So just in a few words, I named him David. It's not his real name. It's a 5-year-old boy who fled from Mariupol with his pregnant mother. They fled from a burning house and they escaped while walking beside dead bodies. So it was a really traumatic experience for both of them. For 2 days, David didn't say a word. He became completely silent. He became muted. And after that, when he started speaking again, he really started to stutter. He became really closed inside his own world, so he wasn't able to pay attention to others. He started going to a small kindergarten group here in Hungary, but he became really defiant. He had oppositional problems with all adults. He wasn't able to be connected to other people, and the mother was really stressed about this, that the changes in functioning were not getting better, because they had some online therapy sessions and it was really not changing, and she was frightened. She didn't know how to help David. And in this case, we worked also with the mother and with the son. Right now, actually, they are back in Ukraine because the mother is giving birth, but they will return. Right here, you see these drawings. Maybe for some of you, these are familiar characters. This blue stuffed animal on the side was the only toy that the little boy brought back from Ukraine. So all of his toys were burned down, and this was a really sad experience for him, that he lost all of his toys, and he didn't want to play with anything since then. Only this, it's called the Huggy Buggy. So he had this blue stuffed animal that he was carrying with himself everywhere, and it was protecting him from this other character, this Momo, who is really evil. This is what the small boy said, and this was the only thing that he was able to speak about. So he also had some separational anxiety. He didn't leave the mother, and he wasn't able to go to the toilet alone. He was always wanting some protection, someone to go with him there. And this was also a symptom that the mother didn't understand. Why is this so stressful? Why is he afraid to go to the toilet? We had a session with him that was really interactive with some dramatic techniques, and the interpreter really got involved. And it was a session where the boy was able to connect, and he was able to, with his imagination, contrast these two characters and make them fight. And of course, his character, this blue toy, won. And in itself, I think this was not the big step forward, but for the mother, this was a really heartwarming moment, that she actually saw that his son is able to connect, and he's alive, and he's really into something. And this was also a time when we told the mom that they should grieve their losses. And after this session, they drew down all of the toys that the little boy lost, and they said goodbye to them and buried them in the ground. So this had an effect for not only the child, but the parent also. And she started remembering more facts about their escape. And she remembered that when the missile hit their building, that's when the little boy David was on the toilet, and he had to escape from the toilet. And this was the reason why he was afraid to go in there since then. So this was a session that was really interesting, because the parent was able to change her perceptions, and this helped the child also to deal with his trauma.
Thank you so much, Timea. This is the conclusion, yeah?
Yes, this is the last slide.
Thank you so much. I can see a couple of comments. We had a few more minutes, a couple of more minutes for your presentation, so we can take these comments on the chat. Mike Nkube says, thank you for, recognizing me. Mine is a contribution on the stressors on people in the settled country. One, the challenges of getting asylum or refugee permit is very stressful and leaves a mark on the child's mind forever. And two, getting basic human rights like schooling and health. Thank you so much, Mike, for your contribution. And if anyone wants to add anything on, please use the chat. Thank you so much, Timea. And if there is no more comments for now, we are going to move on to the next speaker. And after the next speaker, we will have another Q&A session. So our next speaker is Ie Suzanne Akasha, based in Denmark, and she is the technical advisor at IRCT, the Reference Center for Psychosocial Support. So, Ie Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Timea, for your presentation on the work you're doing in Hungary. And having just been doing a few assessment and also assessment visit to Hungary, it really brought back a lot of images to me when thinking about what I had seen there. And I would like to talk to you about what I've been asked to talk about. and that is psychological first aid. And first of all, I'm just going to say a bit about me. I've been a delegate, meaning you've been sent out to different countries, and I'm going to talk about some of the experiences working with children in war zones. I'm going to share examples from Pakistan, Lebanon, Syria. So also thanks to the previous intervention that also brought back memories both from Syria, my time in Syria and Lebanon. And I've been working with in and out of school programs for children and their caregivers in these countries. And I'm currently involved in a big EU program under the General Directorate, DG Sante, for 5 countries. And I'm working for displaced Ukrainians in these 5 countries. And I'm sorry, interpreters, tell me if I'm speaking too fast. All of a sudden I thought, oh, maybe it was going too fast. So this is me, Ia Susanna Kasha, and my name is actually Ia, and everybody always thinks that this is not a name. So on list, I'm very often just Susanne, but I like to be Ia. And I work at the Reference Center for Psychosocial Support, as you said, for the IRCT. So let me tell you a bit about this. This is important and very strange. So my next, I use my PowerPoint here. So as you can see, we have a lot of national societies. There will be a national society, meaning a Red Cross or Red Crescent society in each of the countries that have signed the Geneva Convention. Not maybe in all, but 192 countries do have a Red Cross or Red Crescent National Society. Now, they are all together in something called the Federation. IFRC, International Federation, Red Cross, Red Crescent. That's where I work, in a reference center. So we're sort of a knowledge center, but we also host the Interagency Standing Committee, Technical Working Group for Mental Health and Psychosocial Support. So we are able to speak up on behalf of the entire Red Cross movement. Now look at this, that comes down here, and that's the original International Committee of the Red Cross. So all this together is the movement. And mind you, we're not an NGO, we're not an international NGO, we're the Red Cross, Red Crescent. We're something special because we actually liaise with the governments of the 192 countries and do resolutions and stuff together. One resolution on mental health and psychosocial support, especially also in war zones. So that's quite interesting. Now, I will be speaking about community-based support, and I'm happy to see that the Istanbul Protocol, I had not read it in full, no, but I had leafed through it, also mentions this more global support, because whenever we support somebody individually in small groups, there's also the rest of the support, and we work in the Red Cross Red Crescent with community-based approaches. We have more than 12 million volunteers. Just imagine. I mean, that's huge. And they actually all need to know something about psychological first aid that I will talk about specifically for children and our programs. So one of the things that we do, and that's quite interesting, that you may know that we also do in war zones, is that we work with something called protecting family links or restoring family links or tracing. That's part of the mandate of the Red Cross Red Crescent, to be the one that ensures that what the Geneva Convention says, that everyone has the right to know the fate of their loved ones. And in any country all over the world where you have a Red Cross Red Crescent, you can go to them if you've been separated from loved ones, because this happens during wars. We all know that when you have to get up, you have to flee, this is when you get parted, you lose track, you turn around and your child is gone. And you have, if you have children, I'm sure you've all tried that, been in a supermarket and you turn around and you're just like completely in terror because you can't find your child. We've all tried it and we know that kind of terror. And then the child is either called, there's a call on the mic, Could the mother of Adam, age 5, please come to the reception? And we're so happy. But just imagine you're separated. As we speak, UNHCR has estimated that we have 10 million separated, unaccompanied or separated minors in the world that are on the run, on the fleeing, that are refugees or internally displaced. I mean, think of it, 10 million. So one of the things we do in the Red Cross is to actually also work with the forms where we work on registering these children, what their needs are, to be sure that they're taken care of. And just to give you an example, you think I'm based in Denmark, so I'm working very closely with the Danish Red Cross. We have 3 people in the Danish Red Cross working full-time with protection of family links, restoration of family links. And I mean, we don't have that many people here, but we still have 3 people in Poland. I've just been in touch with Polish Red Cross today. More than 20 people are working full-time on this file. So it's a huge thing. One of the things that they also use in their work is psychological first aid, because when people come, they are in extreme distress. Right. So what we also do at our center is we support the different national societies, the different entities that I talk about, when they want to do something in psychosocial support. And the reason I keep saying psychosocial support is when the center was established, it was called psychosocial support. This was right after the big ferry event, the Scandinavian Star, where a lot of people died. And by then it was deemed to be too advanced to say mental health and psychosocial support, but actually that's the correct term. It's a composite term. We work with both. Okay. Now, we are talking today, we're talking a lot about children and trauma and war. And some national societies, Sweden and Switzerland, to name a few, they actually have centers, treatment centers for victims of torture. I don't know if anybody's here today, but I know that in Sweden they have 6 such centers. And in Switzerland, I have met the people who did the support with children, doing excellent work. They were wonderfully skilled people. So if they're here, my compliments to you. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about the different things that we work with. So psychological first aid is a quite common term these days. It builds on the principles that WHO 2011 came out with guidelines, and they are on the principles of look, listen, and link, or link, however way I want to do it. So it's look, it's listen, and it's link. And why is that? As a Red Cross Red Crescent, we have made our own huge book about it. And we have happy to share all the links. Everything is on our website. But the reason that we have developed more materials on it, because we work with children, we work with programs with children, we work in child-friendly spaces, we work with adolescents, where we train them in this kind of peer support and helping to support others, is that we don't only work in crisis and wars, we also work in every day. We work with youth that are lonely. We work with youth that are in hospitals. We work with youth that are in prison. So with these 12 million volunteers in these 192 countries, there's a wealth of programs. I'm going to focus on those for children. So as you can imagine, when we talk about psychological first aid, there's, and the look, listen, link principle, there's quite a lot about managing stress, managing distress, managing high arousal, managing too low arousal. So for instance, we have everybody we train, they're also trained on the calming techniques, how to calm myself, how to calm others. I'll talk more about that. And then when working with groups of children, for instance, that I'm going to focus on now and talk about the different programs with examples. I am going to mention these skills that we're training people in, because if you go to an individual session, fine. I've been to shelters for the assessment visit, Poland, Hungary, and not Czech Republic, because there were no shelters, and seeing that they were psychologists, they were doing good work, but guess what? The rest of the time, nothing happened. Nothing happened. It was just like you were faced with all your displacement-related stresses for the rest of the time. So what we're trying to do in the Red Cross Red Crescent is actually to work in programs where we work on the transferable skills, as UNICEF have now called them. We used to call them life skills, which is maybe better understood, which is all about training people in cognitive, social, and emotional skills. Some also call it social emotional learning. You have probably heard about that. And the first example I'm going to give is that that's from Libya, where I trained Libyan Red Crescent. They came to Tunisia, and they had been working for 3 years with children of ISIS fighters. And these children were all housed in a big house in, as far as I remember, Tripoli. And they did not know what to do with them. So fortunately, one was an architect. One of the volunteers working there was an architect and did drawings and taught the children how to draw, which was great. And I was doing a training on how to create child-friendly spaces. First of all, with the operational guidance, which sets out all these, how to do it, what you need to take care of, what is child protection, what is child safeguarding, how do you refer, how do you work when you have nobody to refer to? I mean, you get somebody to refer to, how you check out those that you refer to, etc., etc. How to work with children, what have children experienced? And then in this manual, we could actually train them during a 3-day training, which I thought was incredible. When I saw the background they had no previous knowledge. They would actually work with the children and go through all the sessions and became quite good at it. And one of the examples I'm taking from a social skill here is that then they are taught how to work with the children on how to work together. How are we going to work together? What we would call in a training ground rules, or establishing values together. So in 3 days, they actually got this knowledge that they could go back and do something structured with the children that had nothing was happening for them. They were kept completely aside, which is in itself quite horrible to think of, and also with their background. So, Carmen, how am I doing with time? I lost track of when I began, to be very honest.
Thank you for asking. So it is 3:18 and you have until 3:35.
Or 3:30, whatever. Yeah, okay, wonderful. So next I'm going to talk about what can come out of working this was both a conflict zone, and I'm going to move to Pakistan. After the 2010 floods, I was a delegate for a program that was school in and out of school-based program in the Swat Valley. And you may remember that there was this radio mullah. You may have heard of it. There was somebody who was so seductive on the radio that he managed to persuade this entire valley almost that the Taliban way was the right way. So people would send him their gold. Women would take off the gold and send it to him. Now I'm making a bit of a scene here, but it was a quite rough and brutal regime, and the women had to officially abandon working, etc., etc., etc. So after the Taliban, there was a flooding. So I was working in a program with 14 schools, 10 out of which were completely destroyed by the floods. So, and a few of them were bombed while we were there. So then we worked with this program that is called, this is Save the Children and IRCT Essence, and now I'm holding up the French version. So this is Children's Resilience Program, or Manuel A. Yeah, this is a Programme de renforcement, pardon, de la résilience des enfants. So it's a huge program where we had 20 sessions or 10 sessions, depending on where. We would run them in schools. So this is a program for children affected by war and armed conflict that we would run. And I've also done it in Lebanon and in Syria, not done it, but been the program delegate. And one example of a session that I'd like to share of life skills that children learn in this program is, for example, this is session 13, Understanding Conflict. So it's all about learning about different types of conflicts and how you can de-escalate and handle conflicts, conflict resolution skills. Also, they have listening skills. They have how to talk to peer skills. So in short, so far in these two programs, what is happening is that children, and I've seen that again and again, they, even though they've been living in war, they learn to understand their reactions. They learn to understand normal reactions to abnormal events. They learn to regulate their own emotions, and they learn how they can build their own resilience. We don't phrase it to them as such, but they do learn that. I have been with children. We work through teachers and volunteers. So when we are talking about these 12 million volunteers we have, you can imagine a lot of them have good backgrounds. They could be teachers, pedagogues. A lot of them are just people who are really keen. So we train them to handle all these reactions and to work with children in such disadvantaged positions. That's quite unique and quite impressive. So I couldn't be there all the time, I should say, because of I was not always allowed to go because there was too much unrest. But when I went and I could see the children in their classrooms doing these sessions, it was fantastic. And those of you who've been in the field and who have seen it will know what an impact it makes when somebody stands up and declares, I want to go to the 5th grade one more time because I want to do these sessions. And also how we know that the most important thing in child protection and child safeguarding is to get caregivers on board, but it also works the other way, so that children actually, they teach their siblings and they teach their families about what they learn in these sessions. So the concrete example that I also love to talk about is that Swat Valley is a very, very traditional area. They would accept, they accept me because I'm foreign, but you know, all the volunteers would be fully proper dressed, etc., etc. But we had this case of oh, sorry, I didn't tell you that in the Children's Resilience Program, we start with sessions for caregivers. There's actually accompanying sessions, part of the program for caregivers. So staff and volunteers from Swat Valley will tell me we'll never get them to come. So what happened is that we had, of course, we had the blessing of the local mullah, the most important one, and the school authorities to run the program. So he would say to parents, caregivers, you should come. And after 4 sessions, they came up to the team and said, 4 sessions, that's not enough. We need a week. So there was this huge wish to learn to understand children, just like Timea talked about. How do we understand something that we don't understand? Because we don't have the concepts. We don't have the words. We're not even ourselves able to identify our feelings. So next, what happened is that we were going to do a session on prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, not only for the staff. So I said, let's do it for the caregivers. And staff said, no, we can't do it. Can't, won't. But in the end, it was the caregivers who came and said, could you please train us? Because we know it's happening. We know that our children are abused, but we don't know how to talk to them about it. So my point here is that by being there for 4 years, we worked 4 years, the trust is established within the community, enabling it to speak up. So this is why I'm always very much, and I love therapy, been in therapy for years myself, but there's the other 23 hours to think about. Always ensure that we have a good protective social community base whenever we're working. So that would be my very important point here. So we also work a lot with faith leaders, of course, training them on psychological first aid. Now, the final example that I'm going to give here is from a guide for teachers to use in schools, where there are 16 themes that they can use. And one of the themes is I listen to myself. You know, really, I find out what's happening. I listen to others, which is all about the psychological first aid, being able to support your peers, listening to your peers, not putting them down, being inclusive. And then there's a theme that's related to what we're talking about today. I can calm myself, where teachers are then have a set of exercises they can use. So it's all about talking to children about how, when being upset, how they can, and actually one of the exercises was inspired by something they did in Switzerland. So it can be exercises like asking a friend. They do an exercise on how can you ask a friend to help you calm down when you're upset. How can you, for older students, how can you deal with worries? How can you, with the class, develop a whole range of things that can help you calm down? That was one that was inspired by Switzerland when it was the Swiss colleagues, when it was put in the manual. And then there's a few techniques also that teachers can use, how they can really, if one of the children really is in a state of completely hyperarousal, how they can bring them back and how they can stabilize them. A colleague of mine is also on the call, I saw, and this is why finally let me bring out this little manual that was translated by this colleague who's on the call. Thank you for translating it into French, where there's also stabilization exercises. My point in bringing this up is that this is what we train the volunteers in when we do trainings on psychological first aid. If we do trainings on how to run these programs. Trainings on running the Children's Resilience Program is, of course, longer, 2-week trainings. PFA can be short. It can be anything from an hour, 3 hours introduction to 5-day trainings that we're going to do in Budapest in 2 weeks in a training of trainers. Yes, all the material that I have mentioned and a lot of others is on the website. And one thing I want to show you, I'm going to share my screen. I haven't done Zoom in ages, so yes, share screen. Here it is, and it should be up and running. Yes. So here's one thing first. I'm sharing my screen. Yes. Can you see what I'm sharing?
We can see your screen. It is not in full screen.
Yeah, okay, but you can still see there's a manual.
We can still see there is a manual. That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because we have 4 manuals, 2 for PFA for adults, 1 for children, and 1 for groups, so that we can train our volunteer team leaders to do a proper, not a debriefing, but support to group after any critical events. Because, as I mentioned, we do in the Red Cross, we do not only the restoring family links or protection of family links, but they also do dead body management. I've been working in Afghanistan with volunteers who went to the field and collected the dead bodies, and with women in Afghanistan who ran schools under cover during Taliban. You know, they are doing a lot of things. Now, in the current Ukraine crisis, the Ukrainian Red Cross asked us to produce short videos on psychological first aid that they could use in shelters. So we produce that they could use on their mobile phones, plus material on how to talk to children about war, exactly what Timea was mentioning, because that's how do you know whether it's right to talk, or should you say don't think about it? So if I can get that one, the other one up. I had put them, sorry, I can't right now. I thought I had put it up. I'm not gonna, oh, that's because I have two screens. Sorry, I'm just forgetting that. But if you go to our website, there are posters that we hang in. They're supposed to be printed out in big, that are hanging in all over these countries where Ukrainian displaced people are, where it says how to talk to children about war. I think I have come to the end, and the time, how's my time, Carmen?
Thank you so much, Ia. So you have 5 more minutes. On the one hand, if you feel that you've come to a conclusion naturally, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to add more, you're also welcome.
Okay, I think I've said what I wanted to say. And I know that you have a designated time for the Q&A, and I think Timea also there must be very good questions for Timea, because that was also really interesting. Final point, also think about the community-based. And here are the links to all the PFA resources, and we have podcasts, we have everything like that you have in your beautiful website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ia. Thank you so much for pointing us to these links that Berta has shared in the chat. For the participants, feel free to start checking them in case there is any questions popping in your minds that you want to share. And thank you so much, Ia, for the practical insights from the front line about caregivers being asking themselves to be trained, the importance of trust being established with the community, and the fact that a community base is a protective factor. I think these are very important insights for us. Thank you so much. And now perhaps my colleague Berta can bring our fabulous program for everyone to recap on when we are. But we have 10 minutes for Q&A. And after the Q&A, we will have a second break, after which we will have Stella from Tree of Life with us. So we're entering the second Q&A. So please type your comments or questions in the chat, or raise your hand if you have any questions for our last two speakers. And whilst you do that, I will pick up two of the previous comments if there is nothing new for now, which I can see there's no other new comments and questions. So I will check the last two that we had. We had a comment from Fundación Priva in Ecuador, and I'm reading from Spanish. So again, bear with me if my interpretation is not excellent. The lack of nutrition in the lack of food for children, sons of women who do not have freedom, who might be in prison, is also a form of torture by the state. Mothers who are in prison are desperate when they see that their children do not have the right food, which can lead to children presenting anemia, lack of iron, and they can become ill constantly. And these women, they see themselves in a position in which they have to stop eating themselves to feed their children. And this is something that happens in the prison. Apologies, because there is a better term for that, but I'm not able to translate it. In the prison for women in Ecuador. And it's also a reason or a cause of altercations in prison. And that was a comment from Fundación Priva, which is one of our member centers in Ecuador. And then we had another comment. This says, others develop aggression and attachment issues into their adolescence unless they are supported. I have had clients like that struggling with childhood experiences despite their age. So these were 2 comments that we had from the presentations before. I cannot see any questions or comments in the chat. Is there any person that would like to ask anything before we go on our break to Ia or Timea? And I will also remind the question that Timea asked us earlier about whether it is an adaptive behavior or not for parents to not speak about the war experiences to children. What do you think? Do you think this is something that is an adaptive behavior or maladaptive, and why? So if you have any comments, you can leave them in the chat, and I will give a few seconds. Otherwise, we can go into the break. I don't see any new inputs. I remind my colleagues as well, the previous panelists, Roberto and Hugh, if there's anything that they wanted to add, or if Timea or Ia, if there's anything that you want to add yourself, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we're just going to go into the break. And to the participants, I know it's a long event, but I encourage you to be with us, because after the break, we will have with us the director of Tree of Life, a member center in Zimbabwe, Stella Motzi, who's also a specialist in child protection. So with that being said, we will go on to the break, and we can make it 10 minutes. So we will be back at 3:45. Hello, everyone. Very recently, I was part of some sessions that were 4-hour sessions with a couple of breaks as well. And we had someone who was delivering the sessions who actually played the guitar after the breaks, and it was excellent because it woke everyone up. It got people's attentions and it got us in the mood. So I don't know if I might have to start learning how to play the guitar or something similar to add a bit more to the sessions, these long sessions after the break. So right now we are on to our last speaker, Stella Motsi from the Tree of Life, Zimbabwe. She is the director, and as I was mentioning earlier, she is a child protection specialist with nothing less than 17 years of leadership experience in development and humanitarian work. And she's got a background in developmental studies and social work, and she possesses knowledge and experience in international protection, safeguarding, and research. And she's specialized in protection around sexual exploitation, trafficking, and reporting and response regarding children and gender-based violence. So Stella, we're very happy to have you here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for the introduction, and my sincere apologies for the quality of my video. There's something wrong with my laptop and it's going to be fixed soon, but hope you can see me. And Carmen, thank you very much for such a huge introduction. I was listening and I was thinking, is that me? Thank you so much, Carmen. So my name is Stella Motsi, like you heard, and I work for Tree of Life Zimbabwe. We are based in the southern region, which is Bulawayo. What we do as Tree of Life is we mainly focus on trauma healing and also our social cohesion as an organization. So over the years, we have been focusing mainly on adults in terms of trauma healing, but of late, our strat plan has actually recommended that we also start to work with children in the sector. And through our engagements with the adults, what we have seen so far is that for most traumas that then presents at an adult stage, they would have mainly started off when they were children. So that was a very good recommendation that led to us considering working with children in our strat plan. So yeah, and today IRCT has asked me to present on how to work with children, especially in the war and the trauma that also comes with children who've been affected in the war. So today I'm gonna share a case study. Before I joined Tree of Life, I once worked with unaccompanied asylum-seeking minors. So this is based on a true story, but I've just changed the name and the country so that we don't recognize the young persons involved. So this case study is around a young boy, aged 14, and his brother, 11 years of age. They were from Afghanistan, and they were sent to England by their father. The father paid
Stella,
illegal traffickers to
if you can hear us, sorry,
yes.
Your audio froze for a couple of instances. I think you can continue now. I can see your image well, and I think your sound is now okay, but perhaps if you can speak a bit slower also for the interpreters, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So the father paid illegal traffickers to transport his children to England for their safety and also for a better life. The war had led to his wife being killed and he wanted to protect his 2 boys. The boys traveled on an overloaded and unsafe boat to England. Hence, unfortunately, the youngest of the boys accidentally fell into the sea and died, and no one could save him. The older brother made it to England. However, he blamed himself for the death of his young brother. He felt like he had failed the young brother. He also felt like he had failed his dad because he had been asked to take care of his young brother. The feeling of guilt and failure haunted the young man, and he decided not to tell his father when he arrived in England. He thought he would just continue to tell him they were both doing okay and his young brother was doing okay and they'd traveled well. For fear of upsetting his dad and for fear of his dad labeling him as a failure, the traumatic experience of him losing his brother in such a terrific way led to depression and post-traumatic disorder for the young person. So that's the case study we have today. And I wanted to bring on board some discussion for the team. So you can see from the background of the case study that there was a lot of issues that were brought upon this young boy because his country was in a war and he had to handle the trauma that he'd gone through alone, number one. And secondly, he was also having to handle this unsupported because he didn't have his family. He was now in a foreign country, and half the time us as social workers would speak to him in a foreign language, which he didn't understand, and at times would engage an interpreter, but all the same, there was a third part in terms of language. And also he had huge responsibilities. For example, him having to take care of the young brother throughout the journey and having to contain the pain and also even the grief that he was going through, but to pretend and be a strong guy and even not tell his father the truth that he had lost his young brother. So this is some of the issues that young people can also go through. And you can see that he was running away from a country which was war-torn, but it ended up leading to trauma. The boy was affected by trauma in various ways. First and foremost, I think indirectly, because he suffered secondary trauma because his country was in a war that he didn't decide on. And also he had no power to control what was happening in terms of the war, which made him very vulnerable as a young boy. And secondly, he suffered a lot of direct consequences of the war. For example, he was going through a lot of grief for the loss of his mother, his loss of his brother, and loss of even attachment with his dad, who was now in another country and he was in another country, and he had no control or any way of verifying if his dad was also safe, and moving away into a new country at a tender age like that, and unaccompanied as well. So that caused him to experience a lot of direct and indirect trauma or secondary trauma in some cases. So in such situations, as social workers, we would then come up with ways of how to address this kind of trauma. Because the young boy, as he tried to settle, we noticed that he struggled a lot with post-traumatic disorder. He was bedwetting, he was having hallucinations, he was also having nightmares. People, half the time he preferred to lock himself up in his room. He didn't want to engage even with the social workers. He didn't want to play. So that put him in a very difficult situation. So as social workers, we had to come up with age-appropriate kind of trauma healing models. And I'm glad some of my previous speakers spoke to that. Of course, he was engaged in one-on-one counseling and even trauma healing sessions with therapists, but we also organized group therapy for him, because what we then realized was that he benefited significantly from peer kind of engagements where he would engage with young people, particularly from his country, who spoke his own language, so he related much better with or within
Hi,
a group.
Stella.
Hello.
Sorry. I'm just gonna jump in here to ask you to please speak a bit slower.
All right, my apologies. So yeah, I was talking about how we were able to assist the young boy using various trauma healing methods or models, like engaging in individual therapy, like counseling and trauma healing with various therapists. We also managed to organize group therapy for him, and particularly for the group therapy, we noticed that he engaged more because these were peers. And I think there was a video that we saw where a young boy was being asked, was able to also jump in, of course, with a forced smile on her face, but focusing on the positives. So this is how also the young boy managed to cope better in terms of peer support, particularly from young people from his country. A lot from play therapy. I think we also saw one of the presenters presenting a drawing. We realized he kind of drew his journey from back home and how he traveled all the way to England, and he used art as a way of communicating with the social workers, or even communicating with his friends and the rest of the staff in the reception or receiving unit. What we also realized with this young person who suffered this kind of trauma, which was related to war, was that there was a need for very strong support system for him, to enable him to cope better. That he survived or relied heavily on peers more than qualified personnel. He also dreaded so much, and he spoke so much about, even during counseling session, about his family. So we as social workers had to come up with, encourage him to draw his family, talk a lot about his family, document, come up with a diary where he would document and talk about his family more, and he would easily refer to the diary if he was thinking about his family. And we found that to be very useful in terms of connecting him with his family. What we also then did was to also make sure that we connect him with people from his country in terms of putting him in a supported environment where he was being fostered by a family which came from his country, and that helped him to cope better with what he was going through, because he related to the family that he had been fostered into. We also realized that therapists must find ways of handling triggers and blame, because what we found in this boy was that he continuously saw everything as a trigger for him. I think there was also another presenter who spoke about the young person being scared of going to the bathroom. So for him, we also noticed that even taking a shower was a challenge for him, because the water would then remind him of what happened to his young brother who fell into the sea and they could not save him. He didn't want anything to do with water. Even for drinking, you'd have to encourage him or present it in different forms, like drink, puree, something like that. But just him seeing a glass of water would trigger the memories of what happened to him. In terms of how we can make sure that we address all these things that presented this trauma was the blame. He was self-blaming, if it wasn't that I was born in the first place, my dad didn't need to worry so much about what was happening in terms of the war in his country. He felt his parents would have coped better. He also felt he was the reason why his mother was killed, because she was trying to protect them. Sorry?
Stella, it is Carmen here. Apologies to disrupt you again. We're going to kindly ask if you can switch your camera off because the network bandwidth is low, and we believe that will help the connection. Thank you.
Yeah. Apologies, Carmen. Yeah, I'm also getting a message that my network is very weak. Apologies for that.
We can hear you well
talking
so far.
about perfect. So I was talking about how the young person blamed himself for everything that had happened, including the death of his mother. He felt that he was the reason why the mother had died, because she died in the process of trying to protect his young boys, and she took a bullet instead of the young boys. So he blamed himself for that. He also blamed himself for the situation that his dad was in. He felt like if he wasn't born in the first place, his dad would not be in a situation where he was. He only needed to just take care of himself and him alone, and he didn't need to worry about his two boys. He also blamed himself heavily for not being able to protect his young brother who fell off the overloaded boat, and he watched him helplessly die, and he felt like it was his fault. He should have done better. And we also realized that he was becoming suicidal as well, because he felt like he had let his brother down and there was no need for him to survive. He felt like by surviving, he was betraying his young brother. And so we had to also make sure that we put systems in place to also protect the young person so that he does not commit suicide. What we also realized was the trauma that he was going through was as a result of the war that was happening in his country. And therefore, we need to acknowledge as practitioners that war can affect young people directly or indirectly. And so half the time, what we have seen is that this secondary trauma can actually be passed on to the next generation when it now moves on to becoming generational trauma. And this is how the young person also felt. Even when we were engaging him, or he was engaging with the various groups that we would put him in, we noticed that his discussions were mainly centered around how he felt like as a community from Afghanistan, he needed to gather all the boys and the girls from Afghanistan and bring in that momentum that they need to go back and fight for their country and protect their families and protect their country, which was also worrisome because he was now in a way, influencing other participants in the group or the ones that he was staying with at the reception center in terms of his own experience. So traumatic experience might shape who young people can actually become in future. So we shouldn't underestimate the impact of war or trauma on young people. What we have seen with this young boy was he could easily grow up to be an adult that has been affected negatively or positively by the traumatic experience that he experienced. He could turn out to be somebody who will portray the violence that he saw and even perpetrate it to other people around him, because this is what he has learned in his childhood, and he thinks is the correct way of dealing with trauma and also his experiences. On the other side, we also realized that it could shape him positively because of the help and support that he was getting. He would also probably grow up to be an adult who thinks violence or war is not a good thing, and he would preach the gospel that it's not good for countries to engage in wars or for people to be violent with each other because of his own experience from war. What we also realized working with this young boy, maybe speaking to the Istanbul Protocol, was the need for multi-sectoral approach in terms of the help that he was getting. He also needed legal support to support him maybe with his asylum seeking processes and his stay in England. We also realized that he needed support in terms of medical support or even clinical support in terms of his psychological needs. He also needed psychosocial support, and I was listening to Susanna presenting earlier, talking about the psychological first aid, and I thought, I wish we had that back then. I'm sure you would have benefited a lot from that. So there was a holistic, somebody in the chat also mentioned the importance of education and also making sure that he blends in with the community, the new community that was now staying in England, but making sure that there is a link with his background in terms of his culture and belief. So there was a huge need for multi-sectoral approach in terms of dealing and assisting the young boy handling the trauma that he had gone through. So yeah, Carmen, that is my presentation. I am happy to take any comments or questions from the team.
Thank you so much, Stella. And I think the connection has behaved. Eventually, we could hear you well. I will encourage people to now switch on the cameras for the final discussion if your connection continues working well. Stella, if you find that your connection is still tricky, you can leave it off. It's up to you. Thank you so much for these interesting presentations, and we find it very interesting to hear about theory, but also to hear about what's actually happening in the front line and what people is actually experiencing. So I think that it's food for thought when we hear things such as the many things that can be a trigger, and hearing that a glass of water can be a trigger for someone, and understanding why, and understanding how survivors' guilt can impact a person, and how these traumatic experiences not only cause symptoms, but it goes way beyond. It can shape who the person becomes, like you were saying. And now we have the final discussion. We're doing really well with time. So anyone who wants to share their insights and questions are welcome, whether it is participants or panelists who might have some wrap-up thoughts. You're very welcome. And Lotta, since you're co-organizing this event with us, I wonder if there is any remarks that you would like to make at this point. I don't know if you can hear me. Lotta, yeah, I can see you, yeah.
The only final remark is that I would just like to thank you so much for the all the presentations, all the presenters, and also everybody speaking today. It was very involving and very much knowledge shared. So that's really my only my takeaway, that there's so much I need to think about this for a while. Thank you.
Lotta, it's Hugh here at the IRCT. Can I ask you a question so that we can learn from, from your work as a member of the IRCT, and, as health professionals, talking back to, well, myself, a lawyer, and the rest of us need to understand, I think, more about how are health professionals using or not using the IP, the Istanbul Protocol. Can you talk to us about when you have a case in your center there and you suspect that the person may have suffered torture, what happens? Is there a process in which the documentation of that case is different to the documentation of a case of, a child who's got symptoms of malnourishment, or educational loss, or something else that's not really the same as what we consider torture. I mean, what's the process? How do health professionals use this or not use it?
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, depending on the need, actually, what is needed for that person at that moment? Why do we document the torture, and how do we do it? So depending on the purpose, that's also the sort of the scale of documentation, really. I straight away come to think of families. They might need, because they come to the rehab center for torture survivors. So it's obvious that there has been torture, but to have the right treatment and the right care in the whole system, we provide quite, following Istanbul Protocol, quite thoroughly, depending on why you need a statement. So I would see it more on that edge.
Yeah. And do you make this assessment of how the overall evidence, psychological and physical symptoms actually relates to the allegation of torture? Do you say,
yes.
you know, yeah, you do.
Yes, yes. And especially when it comes to children, and as we heard today as well, not really knowing body parts and so on, we have these small cards for children to also learn what body parts we are discussing and so on. So we have a long process of first also giving the children the tools they need to be able to tell about their torture before because then we build trust at the same time. And we had a long educational set today before this one, where we introduced also the body maps and the body charts, because they are exceptionally good, those in the Istanbul Protocol. They will be probably, hopefully, used on a national level quite soon as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hugh and Lotta. And I'm going to, maybe Hugh, could you mute yourself? Thank you. I'm going to read a couple of comments on the chat. Justin Juma says, Stella, that is a wonderful presentation. It is interesting that traumatic experiences can either present positive or negative effects to the life of a child. I thought the same, Justin. At the IRCT, we also have a project on survivor engagement, which is precisely about those people who experienced a torture and want to speak about that. Like Stella said, there's people who will preach the gospel. So that's an angle that we're trying to cover and discuss as well. And we have another comment from William Odipo that says, psychological stability among children affected by war situation depends on availability of communal support structures. During my work in the educational settings of the Nuba Mountains in Sudan, I noted that the children were psychologically stable because of the support they received from their peers during playtime, parents, elders, and religious structures. As therapists, we need to stabilize the communal support structures in societies that are affected by war. Thank you so much, William, and I think I can recognize some of Stella's message in your message as well, because I think, Stella, you mentioned that this case where actually the peer structure that the child had around was of perhaps more impact than the therapists at a certain point. Is there any other questions or comments that we would have? And Hugh, I thought is there anything else that you would like to add to the dialogue with Lotte? Because we tend to have these two angles of clinicians on the one hand and lawyers on the other hand. At times, clinicians' views might be that they have the clinical expertise to establish whether torture has happened according to forensic evidence, but there's a step beyond that about reporting torture and the duty to report torture versus the duty of confidentiality and so on. So this is a gap that needs to be breached. And I don't know if anyone has any insights that they would like to share about this, Hugh or anyone else.
Well, insights, right. I mean, I would be interested to hear from Lotte, what happens then once you've got the case file completed and you suspect there's reasonable grounds to consider this person was tortured. What do you do with that case file? Does it just sit in a filing cabinet, or what's the next step? Is it used in any accountability process?
Well, yes, the next step when it comes to if the assessment is done and we have a thorough report, so just whatever is needed, if there's an asylum process, of course it will be forwarded to the person's lawyers, and usually is quite strong evidence for asylum, depending on situations as well. Many or usually the immigration also might suspect torture and ask if we can add or make a report, and then there's a sort of ordered report. And depending totally on the situation, we work very closely with officials in the way that we can communicate if there is a statement needed, if there is suspicion somewhere in the network, and they need to consult us and have a report, then they will also send a client. And we, of course, then will also assess the need of treatment. So we work in 3 different teams, and we work multi-agency. So we have a group of 5 in every team, considering children, war trauma, or tortured adults. So yes, for different reasons, we have different sort of tracks also.
Thank you so much, Lotte, for this clarification. I can see a question on the chat, or a comment or a reflection by Arantxa García del Soto that says, thank you so much to everyone. Any comments on how to coordinate better to produce eyewitness reports for survivors of torture in trial? So Arantxa, I will say that at the IRCT, we do have a person who is our Istanbul Protocol coordinator. His name is James. He's not with us today, as he is in a very different time zone. He's probably sleeping. And he coordinates the International Forensic Expert Group. So I would be very happy to put you in touch with them to address your query. And is there any other comments that, yes, Hugh, I can.
Yeah. I mean, an important point to make there is eyewitness evidence of torture is not the same thing as documenting the individual allegation of torture based on the person, usually their symptoms, the physical, psychological symptoms. So what IFEG are doing is taking documentary evidence, usually photographs, medical reports, and using them in specific individual cases when the states who torture obviously cover it up. They say it didn't happen, or if it did happen, they get their own forensic experts to say, oh, actually, this person just fell down the stairs. Yes, they've got bruises, but it wasn't inflicted by police brutality or, beatings for confession, that kind of thing. So that's where IFEG step in, is that they can then independently say, no, these bruises, these lateral bruises are consistent with having been already subjugated, handcuffed. There's no justification for that level of violence as a police officer. This is, violence for intimidation and punishment amounting to torture, because that's, that's not a lawful use of police force. But yeah, if we're interested in gathering best quality evidence, Arantxa, then I can also point you to IRCT's protest toolkit, which is an effort to make protesters into also frontline human rights defenders, in that they can document what's happening during protests, because protests are where most torture, in the modern sense of how we approach it, is happening. Torture as unlawful use of force, causing severe physical and mental suffering for the purposes of discrimination or other purpose, punishment, that kind of thing. So let me share the link in the chat here. And maybe I can just share my screen and can just show you. We're lucky enough to have some lovely visuals from our not quite resident artist, but he's a fantastic kind of artist and photographer who takes photos and then colors them up to kind of give us a sense. So why we have all of this is because we work very much on protests now, and human rights and democracy as an interface where torture is happening. Police brutality is torture. And we have this toolkit developed with the Human Rights Center in California, Berkeley. And it's in English, French, Ukrainian, Russian, Arabic, Spanish. So I would encourage anyone to just download, and it's fairly simple stuff, but useful for, sort of the non-professional. How do you document this stuff? Think about what might happen. Try to get police badges, the faces of officers, all of this kind of thing. So yeah, in answer to your question, Arantxa, I would say, yeah, use our protest toolkit if you'd like to.
Thank you, Hugh. It's actually an excellent link. So Arantxa, you heard Hugh, and there is the link for everyone else that might want to check the protest toolkit, which, like Hugh said, is a fairly simple document. It's very accessible. So hopefully you can get something away from it. Thank you so much for that. And do we have any other comments or questions? I do have a question. So as we were saying earlier, we have this sometimes gap between clinicians and lawyers or people with a legal background about their different views of the Istanbul Protocol. So with your legal background, Hugh or Roberto or anyone who wants to answer, what would you tell to a health professional about why it is important to use the Istanbul Protocol? Because one answer is because the state says so. But if you had to argue with a little bit more persuasion or to explain a little bit better of the impact of using the Istanbul Protocol versus the consequences of not using it, what would you say?
Great question. Okay, let's have a go. First of all, when we talk about torture, we're not talking only about health consequences of something bad that has happened. Torture is an international crime. It's prohibited at the highest possible level in the legal order. Jus cogens, which means you don't even have to have signed the Convention Against Torture, for it to be a crime in your jurisdiction. And it is subject to universal jurisdiction, which means that any perpetrator with reasonable grounds for suspicion and evidence against them should be prosecuted wherever they're found, no matter if they're in a completely different country, because the international community has outlawed torture at this, absolute level. And I mean, 800 years in English law, we've turned our backs on torture. Apparently, it's such a well-established moral legal principle that when you encounter it, when you're working with potential survivors, you're not just working in a health setting only, you're working within a legal framework. And actually you can't escape the obligation to document and to report, with the caveat that, of course, there's ethical constraints in terms of do no harm to the individual themselves if they would be subject to further torture, or there'll be, reprisals, all of those kind of things, and they're all set out in the Istanbul Protocol. But the real message, and I didn't get to the last video, but it's Nora Sveas, who is on the subcommittee for prevention of torture. The message from, and of course one of the authors of this document, is that all health professionals should be upgrading their professional expertise to become very familiar with the Istanbul Protocol. It doesn't mean that in every case you have to do a medico-legal evaluation to the full extent that might be required by a particular expert practitioner in an ongoing legal case. But in terms of forming the web of accountability, and everybody thinking about why is torture documentation important, it's the move is to open this thing up. Perhaps I can play a video, just the last couple of videos, because people say this better than I do, so we may as well.
You go ahead, since there is no other questions or comments for now. I think we can use the discussion we can use the videos to illustrate the discussion.
Okay, great. Let's see now. I'm looking here. Okay. Oh, heck. Let me try again. Did I share the sound? Hang on. Sorry, everybody. Share screen. Yes, optimize for sound. Okay. Let's have a quick look at.
Huge. I would also want to add the one where Pau is telling about why a physical assessment and a psychological assessment should go together.
Yeah. Okay. Should we play that one? That's why must there always be a psychological examination? Yes. Just to sort of finish this point, what does the updated Istanbul Protocol say to health professionals? Now, these are very short videos because they're made for putting up on social media. Is it working? Yeah, there we go.
I think what the Chapter 7 tries to do is to place the importance of the Istanbul Protocol on the ground, where health professionals are working on a daily level and on a daily basis. It is to try to engage with professionals who are not necessarily very aware of torture, or have not working in places where often the issue of torture or treatment has not come over the radars, to say it that way. And we're speaking about addressing health professionals working in emergency settings, in migration settings, in centers where asylum seekers are being held, either detained or in open centers. We're speaking about people working in regular hospitals, general practitioners, and all of these settings where we know so well that people may come with experiences of torture or treatment, but where it has often been not considered as their duty to look more into it. But now this is a way to really communicate with everybody in the health profession, saying that this is your duty too, and referring, of course, to the international standards, but also to the moral obligations enshrined in most of the ethics in most professions. We know that it also provides a tool and guidance, because there may be situations where a doctor or a nurse or a psychologist see and observes and wonders, what do I do now? Where do I refer to? Who do I speak to? What kind of assessment do I do? all of this is not possible to do in the way that we would like to do according to the Istanbul Protocol without sufficient training. And I want to remind you of the obligations of the state to provide training to health professionals and to others on the total prohibition against torture, on prevention, on rehabilitation, and all these issues.
I'll just play the last one as well, because it's the overall one of what can the updated Istanbul Protocol hope to achieve. It's working. Yes.
Why do we need to strengthen this document, this manual actually? Yes, we need guidelines for this situation because we know that the governments, the state authorities just resist to prevent torture. They're just using torture as instruments to just govern the countries in the world, and particularly with the authoritarian regimes increasing in the world now, it is important to have guidelines.
The point about this is a document not just for governments. This is a document for everyone. And if we can get every medical association, every nursing association, every psychological association, every lawyers association, every journalist association, how powerful they can be, to actually recognize that there is this document. It is a book of reference. It will point out what you need to think about when you are faced with a dilemma. And that is the strength of this new document. Because preventing torture does require us to recognize that above all else, we must value all people. We must value not just the median, the local norm, as it were, but we must value everyone, whether they are members of our society or just visitors to our local communities and society. And we should never give up on justice. And in that I was very taken this week that a 101-year-old man was found guilty of war crimes from World War II this week. There is never an end point to when justice can be sought. It is a very, very long delay, but it is justice of a sort.
Okay, so what I think is very interesting, and just one of the major points to get across, and it's hang on, it's still playing. It's encouraging to hear from Lotta because it's very different to our experience with our Swedish member centres from the Red Cross, who came to the office and we had a big discussion about using the Istanbul Protocol, and they were very reluctant to play any kind of role where they might be, playing the role where they say this person is likely to have been tortured. They found that terribly political, and almost to the extent that they might be prejudicing some future trial or something like that. Well, as a barrister and also human rights kind of specialist, first of all, there are no trials, sadly. They're very, very few and far between. You're not going to be prejudicing some huge legal procedure because there's something like 3% of torture cases ever find their way into even an accountability mechanism, not a criminal trial. Second, your evidence, if you find it torture, will not be the determining factor of a trial. So even if there is a trial ongoing, you can make an assessment on whether this person in front of you has been tortured or not. It's not going to sway the trial. Your evidence might be submitted, might be allowed into the trial, and it'll be weighed against other evidence. So there's really no downside, I don't think, to considering whether all the terrible symptoms you're seeing are actually caused by torture and how sure you can be of that or not. Because it's simply an exercise also in getting us all to think more about where torture is happening, why is it happening. It can help us to document, because at some point, that's all you can really do with torture cases, because it's very, very widespread, and the chance of bringing people to justice is very small. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be applying the highest possible standards to documenting it, because it's an international crime. It requires you to apply a very different set of, well, not different, but much higher set of standards when you're dealing with a survivor. But of course, the obligations are nuanced. And I would just encourage everybody to read chapter 7, because there are legal and non-legal contexts in which medical practitioners will be documenting torture. And the obligation is not quite the same. In a non-legal context, you don't have an international obligation to do a medico-legal evaluation according to the core content of the Istanbul Protocol, which are the earlier chapters. But you're encouraged to do so if you have the time and inclination. And I would say there's no downside to it.
Thank you, Hugh.
Yeah.
And that's excellent insights from someone with a legal background. But again, we have clinicians in the room with us, so I would love to hear from you. I encourage you to type in the chats what your thoughts on these are. And here there is a concern that some professionals can voice at times regarding the balance between their duty of maintaining confidentiality and the duty to report torture. Not just on paper, but as you can imagine, the health professional develops a relationship of trust with the person that they're supporting, and the person might not wish to have their case reported beyond this therapeutic relationship. So how would you address those concerns? What's your take on that? And again, I'm asking you because we have him here with us and he has a lot to say, but this question is for everyone. So anyone that wants to answer or comment on this is very welcome to raise their hand or type on the chat. But for now, Hugh, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks again. Okay, well, I won't answer the question. The Istanbul Protocol will answer the question. So let's have a look. Where are we? Old friend.
Thank you, Hugh. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and I do remember in a recent conversations that we had with colleagues with a legal background as well. They mentioned the role of the Mandela rules in this as well. So I don't know if there's something else you want to bring up, but don't feel like you have to answer this question because this question was to the floor. And as I was reminding earlier on, we also have James, our Istanbul Protocol coordinator, and IFEG, the International Forensic Expert Group, that we could talk to if anyone has any questions that we're not able to address right now.
Okay. Well, let me just guide people to page 6. Okay, paragraph 609. Ooh, that's a lot of paragraphs. But honestly, there's a lot of repetition, so I wouldn't do what I did and read the whole thing. We will be producing a one-page, quick guide to the IP 2022 with all the relevant paragraphs, such as at least I see them, and we'll be showing that later on. But yeah, if you're a health professional and you're concerned about the right to anonymity of your client, the survivor, as against your obligation to report torture, well, we have pages of guidance on the challenges you can face. We've got safeguarding, we've got communication barriers. So fear of reprisals, lack of training, non-disclosure, lack of adequate space, heavy workload, implementing ethical obligations. So, I mean, it's a bit like being a lawyer as well. If your client says, I don't want my name associated with this case of torture, then your first duty is to the client or the survivor, the patient. The same as a lawyer has the duty to their client. What you can do is anonymize with their consent. And even if they won't anonymize, you can raise the issue that you know torture has occurred in this particular context with trusted other professionals who may be able to use that to advocate against torture. But if your client says, don't report my case of torture to anybody with my name on it or any details that link the case to my name, then that's your first duty. Threats. Here we go. So, but I do believe most clinicians will already be quite well aware of these different ethical kind of conundrums. But yeah, I would say the answers are all in the document.
Thank you so much, Hugh. And yeah, an excellent further incentive to check the Istanbul Protocol. And like the Torture Journal chief editor suggested some webinars back, the Istanbul Protocol is, Hugh, I don't know if you can mute yourself or, yeah. The Istanbul Protocol is a text to be followed, but to be interpreted. Most importantly, there is an art, the art of interpreting the Istanbul Protocol. And it would be great to know if we have any other questions or comments. These are our last minutes. I can see that someone unmuted herself. Berta, is that you?
Yeah, I actually have a question for Hugh as well. So, no, I just wanted to, I was just wondering, in your view, what is it that is lacking or missing in the IP regarding documenting cases of alleged torture with children, if I can ask? And maybe I can say that I'm, referring to that article that I shared yesterday from 2019 from the Torture Journal. Let me know if you want me to share that.
Yes, please share that, because I think that's interesting for people to read. Well, I mean, what we know from, academics would say this chapter's really insufficient to cover the complexity of dealing with children and trauma in the context of also documenting an international crime. Because, as everybody knows better than I, working with children who are severely traumatized can be very, very challenging anyway. And then getting to, I suppose one of the key tensions in medico-legal documentation, as opposed to health practitioning, if I can call it that, making people better again, is that what the IP is trying to do is get a complete account of events in a very objective, neutral, legal sense. We need the information in order to make a very strong case that could be used possibly in a trial. So you're not looking particularly for whether your words are healing the individual. You're looking to document their case and get the best possible information. And sometimes those things are the same. You need to be sensitive to the subject, but also ultimately your goal is to get a statement and evidence, other evidence that will hold up as in a court. Whereas I imagine as a child psychologist,
Hugh has frozen. I was making the excellent point that he cannot help it if he has frozen. He cannot say, so I'm saying it on his behalf. Let's see if he defrosts. And
I stopped my video.
now, Hugh, you're back.
I'm back. Okay. Yeah, basically, obviously, as a health professional, you're looking to heal this person, this child in front of you. And that might be very different to documenting their case for the purposes of providing evidence in a kind of a legal accountability process. So that's obviously a key tension. And here we would have this letter from a reader to the Torture Journal. I mean, I think we can leave participants to read it, but basically it's saying that there's a need to create a comprehensive guidance for documenting torture in children, akin to the entire Istanbul Protocol, the original version, which had no chapter on children. It was only aimed at adults. And, you know, these academics would say we need a whole one just for children. And obviously having 7 or 8 pages in this new one is very short, but necessarily so because we can't create a never-ending document. So this is really just guidance, you know, for consideration. But actually, the approach to you know, the crucial stuff for the practitioners, health practitioners, is chapter 7. Is understanding what are your obligations, whether it's a child or an adult, in different settings. And that goes back to this, you know, I would suggest that the main point of the IP is everybody should, whenever they can, be giving their best possible evaluation of all the evidence. They call it the overall possibility of torture based on the evidence you've gathered.
Thank you so much, Hugh. And I'm checking if we have any new comments or questions. I don't think that we do, so we can conclude this session. And just as a reminder to everyone that attended, you have various links on the chat that you can check later on from PFA, their center at pscenter.org. You also have links to the Torture Journal and the, sorry, Hugh, you wanted to say something?
Can I jump back in for one last time to promote, if you're interested in what Pao was saying, and we've only taken the shortest clips from that, then please check our Insights, IRCT Insights series, where there will very shortly be the entire, it's a half-hour, here we go. It's a half-hour clip. It's with chapters. Yes, here we go, okay. It's with chapters, and I think it can be very useful to people to sort of, you know, structure their thinking around this topic. You can see chapters are arranged like this. And I mean, we may not always agree with what Pao says, but it's coming from a place of huge experience, and I would suggest it's certainly very, very strong material to get you thinking about children, war, torture, trauma, and the obligations to document. So, yeah, well, that's it from me. And always refer back to the IRCT website for more information.
Thank you, Hugh. And Hugh saying that with a tongue-in-cheek because we've recently relaunched our website. We have a new design that Hugh has been working on. So, yes, thank you so much for your participation and your attendance today. And it'll be great to see you in upcoming webinars. And you have, as I was saying, links on the chat that you can check if you're interested in the Istanbul Protocol, IRCT, PS Center, and so on. Berta is going to quickly send a survey that is just going to take very, very limited amount of time. So if you could kindly complete that before leaving, that would be great. It just takes a matter of seconds. And after that, see you soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
So
Lotta.
long.
Thank you. I'll just stay connected until people continue completing the survey and so on. So please just take a couple of seconds to complete the pop-up survey and we can call it a day after that. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Estela.